Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy was the son of the Naruto with Karma mark? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Ripcurrent on the bridge. Morning traffic crawled like a metal river, horns pecking at the gray. Percy walked the narrow pedestrian lane of the suspension bridge, coffee burning his fingers through the paper cup. He liked the view from up here, gulls coasting the wind, the city laid out like an argument waiting to happen. He hadn't planned on saving anyone today. That's the thing about plans. The tide laughs at them. A cable barked, not a groan, not a creak, an honest bark, sharp enough to cut conversation. The steel strand twanged, unraveled in a cough of dust, and a half-dozen others answered like dominoes. The far tower shuddered. A commuter bus lurched a meter, two, with a squeal of frightened gears. The coffee left his hand. Hey, move, Percy's voice carried. He didn't waste breath asking if people heard him. He vaulted the rail, landed on the maintenance catwalk, and ran. Wind carved his eyes. Down the span, the bus slid toward the edge like a coin on a tilted table. The driver fought it, white-knuckled. Somebody beat on the emergency exit. People in cars started filming. He planted his feet and pulled. The pull didn't look like anything big, no glowing aura, no choir. He slid 2 fingers against the inside of his wrist, felt the low hum braided through his nerves, and let it open. The city's river below bucked like a dog hearing its name. Up through slats and gaps and broken grates, the river came. Answering in slick ropes that shone like oil. Water climbed the air, braiding into a spiral that caught the frayed cable and wound itself into a wet tourniquet around steel ribs that didn't want to hold anymore. Hold, he told the current. The water tightened, a pale sheen like breath over glass, and the cable stopped screaming. Not quiet. Never quiet, but it steadied. Percy's shoes skidded from the pushback. He set his shoulders and pushed again, widening the spiral, laying a second brace against the next groaning segment. The bus bumped its front wheels into the lane divider and teetered. A kid's face pressed to the window, freckles, a blue backpack strap pinched under the glass. The frame cracked. Clone, Percy said, and split himself. The duplicate was there as soon as the word left him. Boots slapping the catwalk beside him. Same breath, same grin. It leapt the gap, fingers catching weathered metal, and swung up to the bus's emergency handle. The driver saw a teenager with sea spray in his hair and didn't argue. He hit the release. The clone ripped the door wider with both hands. Hand the kids first, the clone yelled. One by one, a woman passed the freckled boy like she was surrendering a sacred object. The bus lurched again. Everybody screamed. The clone hooked an elbow through the door rail and the other arm around the kid. A drone buzzed out of the cloud layer and settled into a lazy circle over the roadway, black rotors whispering. It wasn't a news toy. The gimbal under it wore a military squint. Percy didn't look at it. He made another clone. Clear cars, Percy told the second copy. The clone nodded and sprinted down the lane, banging on hoods, smashing phone screens out of hands with sharp flicks. You want to film? Film the lane you open. It shouted, pointing people to reverse, to give the bus a straight shot if they could stabilize it. A man started to argue about his paint job. The clone didn't slow. It shoved a barricade under his tire and kept moving. The hum in Percy's wrist thickened. The spiral brace fought the weight of steel and wind and a city's carelessness. He felt the strain up his arm and into his shoulder. A line of heat that tasted like copper in old storms. He traced his free hand across the air, fingers close together, and pulled a thin edge off the rushing river. That edge flattened, shimmering, sharpening to a water blade as he willed it to hold shape. He slid it under a second cable like a wedge to keep it from biting deeper into the concrete saddle. People noticed him now. They always did late. The man with the nice car started crying. A little girl with a broken ponytail stared at the wet, spinning brace that had no business being real. The drone dipped lower, lens iris adjusting. A green light winked on its belly. Don't, Percy growled. The drone didn't hear. Unknown on the bridge, a calm voice said from somewhere he didn't see. The tone had command center patience, radio flat but human. Blue jacket, Black tea, dark hair, juvenile male, possible anomalous. All units, maintain perimeter. Eyes only, no live fire. A shadow slid across the lane. Percy didn't stop working, but he clocked the form anyway. The bounce, the confidence, a lightning static crawling on skin. The newcomer landed on the railing like he was born there, a sword hilt touching his shoulder, blonde hair shivering in an updraft. "You," the guy said, like he recognized a math problem he didn't like. "Stand down." Percy looked at him for the half-breath he could spare. The newcomer's boots were scuffed but expensive. The eyes said he slept just fine after a fight. A little thunder danced on his knuckles, as showy as a neon sign. "Hold that end if you're here to help," Percy said, and turned back to the work. The man didn't move. "Name, affiliation, busy. I will not ask again." The spiral brace loosened half a finger's width. Percy swore. He dug his heels, shoved a fresh coil of water into the tourniquet. "I don't care if you're the mayor," he snapped. "Either grab the cable or get out of my way." The man's mouth tightened. Then he vaulted from the rail to the cable housing, blade still sheathed, and put his shoulder to the quivering span. He didn't touch the water. He planted himself against steel and pushed. Thunder crawled over him and into the anchor plate. The iron sang a little less. "Name's Kai," he said through his teeth. "You're welcome, Percy." Percy grunted. "Kids first." The clone at the bus door kept the stream moving. Small bodies, then the elderly. Then a big guy with a forearm tattoo who tried to shove his way past. The clone put a knee into the guy's thigh and dumped him on the catwalk where two more Perrys caught him and skidded him toward the walkway. The driver climbed out last, refusing to leave until he'd counted heads twice. Percy appreciated the stubbornness. "Drone count up," the radio voice said, closer now in the wind, a speaker on a tactical harness. "Keep your distance." "Kai, report. On bridge," Kai said, annoyed. "Assisting. You were sent to observe, not indulge." "Siderin. Noted," he said, and pushed harder. Nay clear in 30 if the bus doesn't pitch." "Copy." A new sound joined the wind and steel and yelling, chopper rotors. The black wedge of a helicopter nosed into the airspace, keeping high, a logo on its side that didn't belong to any morning show. Aegis ran along the fuselage in clean letters. "Of course. Almost," Percy said. He could feel the cables bite on the anchor, the nerve-wracking friction that meant one good jolt could undo a minute of work. He spoke to the river in the back of his head like it was a stubborn friend, coaxing the spiral to tighten without snapping. Sweat tickled his temple. His palms ached. A child tripped on the catwalk and skidded. The clone snatched her collar. She sobbed once, hiccuped twice, and ran with a stranger's hand in hers. "Percy," Kai said, breath steady. "You're bleeding." Percy looked down. A nick on his side oozed under his jacket, probably from the jump. He hadn't noticed. He started to say he was fine. The world flickered. Not the world through him. A shape burned into his vision, uninvited. A dark geometry fanned under his skin, lines like hungry frost racing from his ribs to his shoulder with a will that wasn't his. The mark woke the way a fire remembers it was once a forest. He didn't think. He clamped down. He forced his breath low, slow. Not now. Not for this. The geometry pressed against him anyway, tasting, testing. The hum in his wrist shot up his arm to a hot bloom circling his clavicle. "Hey." Kai's voice was very close. "Stay with me." Percy blinked back to the bridge. The spiral brace had ballooned too quickly. The water surged, slapped the cable, and the cable bucked. Kai lost his footing and slid a foot, stood again, curses popping like static. Eyes on the work, Percy told himself. He softened the flow, coaxed slack out of the water like he was entangling a shoelace. Easy, easy. He found the rhythm. The mark on his chest burned like a handprint pressed too long, but it stopped pushing. Percy didn't give it room to think it was invited. He had a bus to keep alive and a stranger who'd decided to help. That was the whole mission. Clear. The clone at the bus door yelled. "All out. Driver." Percy called. Neutral and let it roll back slow. "On it." The man's voice cracked. Kai glanced at Percy. "Let's walk it." "On your call." Kai counted down from 3. On 1 they eased pressure, step by step, guiding the bus as it slid backward onto better supported road. The water brace squeezed and released, squeezed and released, each pulse matching the driver's timid reverse. Percy rode the flow like a surfer rides a wave that wants to kill him and the board both. He didn't dare look up. One misread of angle or weight and momentum would flip the vehicle into the river, and then the day would get worse. Meters went by. The bridge stopped sounding like a wounded animal and settled back into an argument. The bus's rear tires found flat ground. When the front wheel's finally thumped down onto safe pavement, the driver collapsed over the wheel, shoulders shaking in small, private sobs. No one filmed him. The clone that had smashed phones earlier stood watch with crossed arms. Percy released the spiral. The water unwound itself back into droplets and fell through the grate in a soft rain, hissing along the way like it had opinions. Percy flexed his fingers. His shoulders felt like someone had hammered them politely. Applause started from somewhere it shouldn't have, the kind people give after a plane lands hard. Percy hated applause on principle. He stepped head back into the maintenance lane and almost walked straight into Kai's blade as it came free of its sheath. It hummed. Lightning traced delicate threads along the edge. "Stand down," Kai said, the words leveled, not shouted. Percy lifted his empty hands. "You just watched me keep your job from getting messy. And I just watched something light up under your skin that doesn't belong to you. You don't know me." True. Kai's stance shifted a degree. The blade stayed between them, not quite in guard, not quite casual. Orders were observe. Updated orders are contain. The helicopter's downdraft washed the lane. It kept its distance like it was allergic to lawsuits. The drone tilted to keep both boys in frame. "Contain," Percy said, tasting it. "You brought a sword to contain me. You brought a flood to a crowded bridge," Kai returned. "Answer a few simple questions. We walk off this bridge separately. You run and I chase. Those are the options I can live with." Percy measured him. The lightning hadn't left. It sat around Kai like a tame animal that remembered what teeth were for. He had balance, too, the kind you don't get from fancy lessons alone. He'd adapt quickly if Percy ran or attacked. He'd also hold back enough to avoid bystanders, even if his bosses said otherwise. That mattered. "Fine," Percy said. "Ask, who are you affiliated with?" "Not the council. You smell like salt." "Not their temples." "Village. Black market arcane. The thing in your chest. Who put it there?" "That's not one question. Pick one." "Okay." Percy gestured at the bus. "What do you think I am, after that?" "A headline. A problem set. A Boy Scout with a cursed tattoo. Strategic hazard," Kai said without heat. "Don't mistake bedside manner for naivety." The calm voice returned, closer. A woman in a light ballistic vest moved through the blockade like she belonged to spaces that opened for her. She had a tablet tucked under one arm, hair in a loose knot, eyes that didn't miss exits. "Kai," she said into a mic clip near her collar. "We do this by policy. No incitements." "Understood," he said. "He's cooperative. For now." She looked at Percy, and something shifted in her face. "Not recognition. Calibration. You were first on the brace," she said, more like a note than a compliment. "Efficient. Felt like the right call," Percy said. "Aegis Protocol," she said, for the record. "Field Analyst Mira Cade, not here to make today harder than it already was. We appreciate the outcome. We also have to ask you to come in." Percy glanced at the river. "Hard pass." Mira didn't sigh. She checked the angle of the sun against the tower shadow as if she was measuring his sprint distance. "We're not arresting you," Kai snorted. "We contain him. We talk to him," Mira corrected. Percy smiled without humor. "That works better if I believe either of you." "Fair," Mira said. "Here's something to believe. There's a protocol raid tonight that you do not want to show up to. Different borough. I can't give details in front of this many microphones. If you think you're helping people, you will make it worse by being there. That's me doing you a favor you didn't earn. And if I'm the kind of idiot who shows up anyway, then you're exactly the kind of idiot I thought you were on that bus," she said, tone dry. "Capable, reckless, stubborn about the right things. Please don't make me add dead to the list." Kai didn't look at her, but something in his jaw moved. "He's leaving," he told her. It wasn't a complaint, just a fact he'd accepted before his higher-ups. "He's slippery." The drone slid a meter closer. Percy lifted his hand without thinking and made a small sphere with 2 fingers. The air inside the ball cooled, damp gathered, and he flicked it. The drone's lens fogged. The machine chirped, offended, and backed off to wipe its own eye on the wind. I'm not your enemy, Percy said, and meant it for both of them. I'm also not an exhibit. Kai's sword didn't lower. You run, I chase. He didn't say it like a threat. It sounded tired. Myra's gaze ticked to the water, then to Percy's shoes, then back to his face. If you vanish, you're making a choice about the kind of conversations you'll ever get to have, she said. Sometimes the only leverage you get is the story you tell first. Then hear this one, Percy said. People were going to die. I did a thing I could do. Now I'm going to not be here when your boss decides brave and dangerous are synonyms. We don't decide that way, Mira said. Your drone does. She fought a smile and lost. The mic caught nothing but static. I'm asking, not ordering. And I'm saying thanks, Percy replied. Don't be at your raid tonight. Protocol exists for, don't, he said, softer now. Be there. Something unreadable moved across her eyes. She shifted the tablet under her arm, thumb rubbing an old dent in the case. Then do me a favor I didn't earn, she said. If you insist on doing something insane, leave my brother out of it. Too late, Kai said under his breath. Mira ignored him. Percy touched his chest where the flicker had run under his skin. The geometry slept again, sullen. Tell me his name, he said. I might be hard to kill, but I'm not careless. Mira hesitated, then nodded once like she was pushing a chess piece she'd already decided on 3 moves ago. Evan. She gave no last name. If you see him, you didn't. If you didn't, assume he's smarter than me. That's optimistic, Kai said. She gave the tiniest shrug. He's 17. Percy took a step backward. The river breathed under the slats, the same way it had breathed every day of his life when the city forgot it was there. He exhaled, and mist curled up from the grating. It thickened in a waist-high roll, slid under the lane like a pet, and then climbed to meet him like a stagehand lifting a scrim. Don't, Kai said, and took 1 step forward. Stop, Mira said, palm up to him. To Percy, she added. If you're going to melt away, at least tell me something true. He considered the ask. It felt like a fair trade for the warning. I don't belong to the worst thing that touched me, Percy said. Then he stepped back into the mist. It took him in, slick cool, the way a wave takes a swimmer who knows how to dive under the break. He slid through the catwalk lattice, like a rumor, and dropped the last few meters into the river. Cold slapped him in the face, righteous and awake. He let the city sound fade. He listened to tide bellies rumbling against pylons and set his body with the current. The mark in his chest made a low, impatient note, but it didn't test him again. Not now, not here. Above, voices multiplied. He heard Kai swear once, sharp, professional. He heard Mira give instructions without raising her voice. Drones fanned out over the water, searching for a shape that had become part of everything else blue and moving. Percy rolled, kicked, and let the river carry him to the shadow under the bridge's approach. He climbed a bite-scarred ladder into an access alcove that smelled like damp receipts and salt. He wrung his jacket once, pressed water out of the cuffs with a thought, and stole a breath with his back to cold concrete. His hands trembled. He told them to knock it off and they did. His phone buzzed in his pocket. No one had this number. He bought it off a kid who ran prepaid SIMs out of a bodega that pretended it didn't. He thumbed it open without looking. Stop improvising, little vessel, the text read. A city cannot hold if its keystone melts. Heard you the first time, Percy said to the empty alcove. Get a better metaphor. The reply took no seconds at all. You are not a metaphor. You are a mouth. He exhaled through his nose, disgusted, and smashed the message thread into digital ash. He tucked the phone deep again, like he could put the words somewhere they couldn't echo. On the roadway above, authorities reopened 1 lane. The bus driver hugged a firefighter when he thought nobody was watching. The girl with the broken ponytail sat on the curb with a foil blanket around her shoulders and stared at her shoes. The city pretended, with relief, that it had not almost chewed through another of its own bones. Percy shouldered his way into the maintenance tunnel and started walking. His footfalls mapped the line between doing the right thing and doing it loudly. For now, he would take side doors. For now, he would choose the kind of help that didn't tear away what it meant to be himself. At the tunnel's end, a metal door stuck on swollen wood. He bumped it with his hip, popped through, and took the kind of breath you only get after you've not drowned twice in 10 minutes. He bought a replacement coffee from a cart with a sign that said Carlos's Cafe in marker. The man behind the cart shook his head. "You were on the bridge," he said. It wasn't a question. "You got that look. People who almost die always overtip." Percy grinned and dropped an extra 10. "I almost lived," he said. Carlos laughed. "Good. Live again tomorrow." "Working on it," Percy said, and headed south, steam curling Fr. Owned the lid into air that finally smelled like city again and not like the underside of panic. 2 blocks later, he found the shadow of a building that was friend enough and let himself lean there while the buzz in his bones faded. He looked at his hands and counted fingers like an idiot. 10. Still him. He finished the coffee he didn't need because doing something normal felt like an anchor. His phone buzzed a different way. Unknown number. No geometry behind it. The text was simple. "Don't come to Bedford, 1900. Not a joke. He stared at it, mapped the borough automatically. He'd been headed that direction anyway. He typed back. "Who is this?" 3 dots blinked, paused, returned. "Someone who doesn't like cleaning up after men with swords." He almost smiled. Then he thumbed the contact. To a nickname he'd remember and looked at the time. Enough hours to gather what he'd need. Enough patience to do it quietly. When he stepped back into the sidewalk's flow, he realized the tremor in his hands had stopped. He let crowd noise fill his ears. He let the river settle into the heartbeat it had learned from his father and from the city, which felt like the same thing when he was doing this right. He kept moving. Above him, a helipad caught sunlight. Somewhere in that building a woman with a tablet would be writing a report that misrepresented him only as much as she had to. Somewhere else, a blonde swordsman would be staring at footage frame by frame to catch what he had missed. Percy was okay with both. It meant they were real. The day had work in it still. The raid had a clock on it and so did he. He didn't need to lecture himself about stakes. He'd just seen what the wrong tremor could do to a span that was supposed to hold. When the kid with the freckled face popped with a memory he hadn't asked for, Percy texted a friend in community services without giving a name and sent a bus number and an intersection. He asked nothing in return. The thank you reply came with a string of emojis and the words "got him. People safe. The bridge too." He put the phone away and walked toward trouble like a man heading home. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. The fox leaves no footprints. The dryer at the corner laundromat coughed up a frog the size of his palm and blinked twice like this was a perfectly ordinary way to arrive. Everyone within earshot went back to pretending New York had a rulebook. The frog sat on the warm steel lip, throat flickering. Its skin wasn't coin green, it was the shy brown of damp stone, eyes gold like antique nails. It opened its mouth and spat out a folded square of paper that steamed a little where it touched chrome. Percy peeled it open, expecting a threat or a prank. He got a sketch instead, the kind you draw on a moving train and somehow it looks right anyway. The ghost of a subway platform, the cross-hatching of a pillar with a chipped tile number, 14. A cartoon arrow pointed to a blank rectangle that had to be a maintenance door. The frog hopped onto his wrist. Sticky toes polite. Percy raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" The frog didn't comment. It darted up his sleeve and disappeared. The laundromat televisions all argued about the bridge. Heroes, hazards, drones, a freeze frame of a boy-shaped blur stepping into mist. In 2 frames they'd all decided who he was. Percy stepped outside and let a delivery truck's brakes scream make him a little deaf. He took the stairs into the station, folded the drawing smaller, and kept moving. Platform 14 had the cracked tile. It also had a janitor's bucket, 3 people asleep in different languages on the bench, and a maintenance door painted the color of rules. He looked for a camera and didn't find one that could see the handle. He set his fingers where paint had bubbled from rust and pushed. It resisted like a polite bouncer. He pushed harder. The door sighed and swung inward into a concrete throat that smelled like dust, old pennies, and rain you can never quite place. A line of lights hummed awake, one after another, like someone tapping a keyboard 3 rooms over. He followed the hallway until it became a space. The space was a platform that had lost its trains and kept its echo. A puddle of light spilled from a vent far above. A paper coffee cup sat near the lip of the tracks with a fox doodled on it in permanent marker. The kind of doodle you repeat until it becomes a signature. Late, a voice said. The tone was sunshine with scuffed knees. And your form on the bridge was sloppy. Nice to see you too, Percy said. Naruto stepped out of the shadow like he'd been there the whole time. He wore a hoodie the color of traffic cones that had been washed 100 times until it faded to stubborn peach, and his hair refused to obey gravity like it owed him money. He held a second coffee in a hand with a scar across the knuckles that Percy remembered bumping his chin on when he was 6 and too tall to be carried anymore. The smile was the same, and not. Naruto tossed him a thing. It flashed silver with a hole in the end. Percy didn't think. His right hand moved. Fingers snapped closed on the ring of a kunai as the blade skimmed past his cheek. He caught it by the ring like he'd been doing it for years he hadn't lived. The weight settled into his palm like it belonged there. Naruto said, like a judge tasting soup. Okay, you just throw knives at all your kids. Percy flipped the kunai in his hand. It sat light and heavy at once, perfectly rude. Only the stubborn ones, Naruto said, grinning. The grin softened the lines around his eyes. How's the shoulder? Fine. Percy rotated it and felt the phantom heat of the mark stirred by the bridge, then shoved the feeling back where it came from. You could text, you know. I did, Naruto said. And tapped the frog, now sitting primly on a bench with the air of a courier awaiting feedback. Fastest network in the world. Percy tossed the kunai back. Naruto didn't look at it. He lifted his left hand and the blade kissed his palm and stuck between two fingers like magic wasn't a thing they pretended around each other. He twirled it once and tucked it into a sheath that wasn't there until it was. Walk, Naruto said, and hopped down from the platform onto the long dead third rail. He moved like the ground would be offended if he hit it too hard. Percy followed, the drop easy. They paced the length under the dim rope of lights. The walls wore graffiti that had become history. Naruto talked without telling Percy what to think. It was his favorite form of instruction and his worst habit. You felt it tug, Naruto said. Not a question. Yeah, you told it no, loudly. Percy tried to say that like a joke. It tasted like truth anyway. Good, Naruto said. You don't win arguments with a tide. You make it think the shoreline moved. Percy huffed a laugh. That your trick? Trick. Naruto scratched his cheek. No tricks. Just decisions. Hay stopped under a ventilation shaft that made a wind that smelled faintly of brine. Naruto knelt and drew a small circle on the concrete with chalk he'd lifted from somewhere. One seal mark, not a wreath of them. He looked up. Listen. Percy squinted. To what? The puddle, Naruto said patiently, and tapped the chalk mark. The tunnel. The part of the air that wants to be water. If you're gentle, it will step where you want. He stood, blindfolded himself with his sleeve, and spread his fingers an inch from the chalk. The air thickened. Percy felt the temperature shift and heard the tiniest pop as humidity decided. A skin of water formed above the circle, a membrane that rippled like something alive under a microscope. Naruto lifted his hand. The veil lifted with him, trembling, held shape for 3 beats. Then slipped back to wet concrete. Naruto tugged the sleeve back down. Your turn. No drama. Percy crouched. He set his hand where Naruto's had warmed the air. He didn't call the river. He called the part of the tunnel that remembered last night's rain and the red tongues of puddles people had kicked through while running for trains. He thought about the way glass fog. When you breathe on it and put that picture between his fingers and the chalk. A sheen gathered like a shy idea. It tried to run. Percy kept it. He lifted his hand a centimeter. The water clung and shook like a soap bubble trying not to lose itself. It held for 1 breath, then 2. Naruto leaned in. If you grab it, it pops. If you don't attend, it runs. You're not a prison guard. You're company. Percy let out air very slowly and forgot there was a man beside him who could break mountains with a nice word. He held company with the water for 3 more seconds without ownership, then let it go on purpose. It slid down to the chalk and left nothing to apologize for. Better, Naruto said. You need that for what's coming. The part where I don't get arrested at a raid. Percy asked, standing. The part where people panic and feed the wrong mouth, Naruto said. He didn't tug Percy's sleeve or try to look at the mark hiding under the cotton. He looked down the dark. It's hungry. Always was. I thought it went quiet after. He cut off, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. We're here. You could come, Percy said, low. Be there tonight. Naruto's smile had pride in it and grief standing slightly behind it, the way a good bodyguard pretends not to be family. I put a bell on the thing that wants you, he said. If I stand next to you, I'm the church tower. Then text, Percy insisted. Drop me a map, whisper in my ear like a baseball coach. I won't ask for more. Naruto flicked him a half glare. You ask for more all the time. Doesn't mean I don't know what's fair. You're not fair, Naruto said, voice very soft and fond. You're you. He slid a crumpled napkin from his hoodie pocket and flattened it against the wall. There was a grid scrawled on it in pencil and grease. Street names crooked, intersections starred. He circled a block with a bottle cap. They'll push evacuees from the Midtown lab to a secondary holding site if they think they've been burned. Here, he tapped. You'll want the South Alley. The gate jams if you breathe on it. They'll run a dampener pop-up. Short range, ugly hum. You'll know you're close when your teeth ache. Percy touched the napkin. You always keep maps on garbage. Only the important ones, Naruto said. He slipped the napkin into Percy's palm and closed his fingers over it. For a second he didn't let go. You did good on the bridge. Sloppy, Percy quoted. Naruto's mouth twitched. Sloppy is still good when people live. They walked back toward the frog and the coffee. Naruto didn't make a speech about the mark. Percy didn't ask the question he always wanted to ask. How much of me is me? Because he already knew the answer Naruto would give and didn't want to hear it wrong today. At the platform, Naruto looked at the stairs and scowled like they were an ambush. You have a minute. For you, always. Shut up, Naruto said, and swung a blind side punch at Percy's ear. Percy ducked. He didn't think it through. He didn't calculate angles. Body remembered before brain voted. He stepped inside Naruto's guard the way he'd learned by accident and got a palm on Naruto's sleeve. He didn't grab. He redirected. Used the motion to push himself past, turned, planted. Naruto's follow-up never came. He had already stepped out of range, hands up. Better, he said, approving, like Sai had finally stopped chewing his pencils. No head. Good. You keep your head. The frog croaked like a small bell. Naruto half bowed to it, absolutely sincere. It blinked, then hopped back toward the drier world like it had rent due. They climbed to the street together. Naruto's hoodie made people look and then decide not to. He stopped at the top of the stairs. Don't be there tonight, Naruto said, looking at the sky instead of Percy. Being right isn't the same as winning. Someone has to move the people, Percy said. I can do it and still breathe tomorrow. Naruto's mouth compressed. You say that like it's easy. It's not, Percy said. It's necessary. They bumped fists. Naruto pulled him into a hug like two idiots who were both bad at admitting they needed them and held on a second too long. He smelled like cheap coffee, rain, and something like pine that had nothing to do with the city. Eat, Naruto said into his shoulder, muffled. And take the tunnel west. Cameras are sleeping today. I'll send you a picture if I don't die, Percy said. Send Mira the picture, Naruto said casually. Percy pulled back enough to see his face. Oh, she likes data, Naruto said, innocently. So do you. He vanished. Not theatrically. He turned the corner like he was just a man, and when Percy followed, the corridor was full of nobody and the smell of a breeze you couldn't buy. Percy found a food truck that did shawarma with too much garlic and exactly enough char. The vendor recognized his face from the bridge freeze frames and didn't make it weird. He handed over extra pickled onions like a blessing. Protocol raid, Mira said, standing at the opposite end of the truck like she'd simply been there all morning. She wore a jacket that made her blend and a badge she didn't flash. She held a coffee that had been sipped and then argued with. The wry tilt of her mouth said she hadn't slept, and if she had, she'd bullied the pillow. You keep finding me near food, Percy said. You keep being hungry in public, she said. Walk with me. He did, because it would have looked silly not to, and because something about the way she kept her shoulders loose. A city full of clenched jaws made people tell her the truth and feel like it was their idea. Here's the version of protocol that fits in 2 blocks, Mira said, setting a mild pace. We move people. We catalog what they're carrying. We hold them until we decide they won't detonate cities by sighing too hard. It's ugly up close. I won't sell it to you as pretty. Where? Percy asked. She gave him a look that could have been a smirk if she'd been less practiced. No. Bedford at 19, he said, unwrapping shawarma foil with his teeth. She winced. Fantastic. My comms room has a sieve. You texted me. If I'd texted you, I wouldn't be out here making bad choices in daylight, she said. Don't go. I'm not letting you run a van line into a building with dampeners and hope nobody blackouts their soul. Dampeners don't do that, she said automatically, then grimaced at her own defensiveness. Sometimes they do that. I'll be a rumor, Percy said. No confrontation. Jew. Saint openings where you forgot to lock doors. You'll make my job harder. I'll make your outcomes better. You think outcomes are a graph you tune with a knob, she said, tired. They're a forest. You get lost in and hope your radio still works. He took a bite. The garlic burned in the best way. My knobs are very nice. Mira snorted into her coffee. That sentence is never innocent. Listen. She stopped at a crosswalk. Watched a cyclist invent a new law of physics to run a red. Leave my brother out of your heroics. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it, she said. She didn't look at him when she added. He's on a list he didn't ask for. If you pull him out, Director Halvorsen will salt the earth to get him back. If you pull him out and make it look like protocol error, I see. And maybe, bury him properly and let him be a student again. What does he study? Percy asked. Being 17, she said, like it hurt. And everything that comes with it. He finished the wrap in 3 bites he didn't remember taking. He wiped his fingers on the foil and folded it into a neat square because it gave his hands something to do instead of reaching for her sleeve and saying yes to a thing he'd already decided. Last chance to take the day off, Mira said. Go to a movie. Yell at a screen. I'm terrible in theaters, Percy said. Talk too much. I guessed, she said, smiling for real once. Then she waved the smile away. Okay, if you're going to be a problem, be a helpful problem. South Alley is weak point. They'll put dampeners on the north and east because they always do. West is loading. South is laziness disguised as confidence. Noted, he said. Why tell me? Because if I don't and you show up anyway, I have to watch you improvise into a gutter, she said. Like it was a bad movie she refused to see twice. Because your rescue math yesterday was good even when your mark tried to eat your hand. Because I like it when the right people get out. You keep that in your file? He asked. I don't keep files, she said. I keep promises. She stepped back a pace like a conversation had an agreed upon weight limit. You vanish now, she said. Or, I have to make this look like an arrest just to convince my own building I'm not colluding with a hazard. I'm a hazard now, Percy asked lightly. You're a tide that doesn't ask permission, she said. Come back dry. She left first, shoulders flowing into pedestrians like she'd never stood still. He let her get 2 storefronts away before he ghosted through a deli into an old service hallway and out the back. Into a narrow slice of sun that felt stolen from someone else's day. The city remembered to be loud all at once. A bus fumed. A locksmith drilled a new home into a door. A woman forced a phone company in Spanish with the clean precision of a poet. Percy bought a pack of chalk from a kid selling school supplies he probably didn't own and a roll of masking tape from a paint store. He texted no one and taped nothing to anything and walked like a man whose pockets held plans loose enough to breathe. Afternoon ran itself down. He used the hours to memorize the blocks around D. Ford and the alleys that had more cat than law. He tapped drains and felt how the water moved in them. He found a church with a back spigot that wheezed against rust and left it loosened enough that a twist would make a mess when a mess would be a gift. At 1837 he was under a fire escape, palms open, marking a thin fog line along a fence like a piped frosting that only he could taste. He didn't summon big water. He summoned cooperation. The air leaned in, ready to be veil on command. He listened. Sirens swallowed by distance. A hum like power complaining through cheap equipment, then the N. Oat he'd been taught to fear, the headache buzz of dampeners spinning up. His molars sang. He rolled his shoulders and kept his breath shallow until the pressure passed into background noise. 2 Van S with Aegis decals pulled around the corner at 1852. Security theater with real teeth. A third van with no decals followed, the color of poor decisions. Move, a voice said into a collar. Percy counted boots. 6 in front, 4 at the back, 2 inside at the ready. Mira wasn't there, which felt wrong and also meant she was somewhere smarter, pressing a keycard against a moral quandary. The South Alley gate tried to be important. It was chain link wrapped in a lightweight padlock that looked more expensive than it was. Percy breathed on it from across the street. The lock sweated. The pins inside stuck. It would jam ugly the second someone put real weight on it. He waited. Waiting is work if you're doing it right. He watched shoulders and habits. He watched for men who looked for exit signs before they needed them. He watched for kids who stared at the ground because eyes on the horizon meant hope and hope made cuffs tighter. At 1903, someone inside hammered on the South Alley G8 because panic is a metronome you can set your watch by. A guard jogged over with a grin he'd practiced on mirrors. He tugged the lock. It laughed at him. He swore. He called for bolt cutters. Cy stepped into the alley like he'd been there since 1994, hands in his pockets, posture unremarkable. He coughed, once, and the fog line he'd drawn earlier slipped down over the chain link like someone had pulled a curtain. The guard swung his head as the world lost contrast. He didn't pull his gun. He rubbed his eyes like the kind of tired you don't fix with sleep. Percy slid his fingers through the links and twisted. The veil held the sight line just enough. He spoke through metal in a voice that wasn't a whisper and wasn't a shout. "Walk with me if you want clean air in 5 minutes," he said. No yelling. Eyes appeared on the other side, too many, every color that fear comes in. A girl with a shaved head and a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big looked at his hands, not his face. Smart. A boy with a split lip watched the guard instead. Smarter. Smallest first, Percy said, and the shaved head girl nodded like her bones already knew that command. He eased the link fence out of its rack an inch with a push that felt like asking a stubborn dog to scoot. The fence scooted. Tiny bodies found the gap without making it look purposeful. On the street, the dampeners hummed with professional pride. In the alley, the fog obeyed. The third body out was a kid with a face that hurt to look at because it had pieces of Mira in it. The way eyes check exits, the way a mouth holds words it doesn't waste. He carried a cheap backpack with a hand-drawn schematic on the fabric in pen. The lines were neat enough to be dangerous. "Evan?" Percy asked, not moving his lips much. The kid's gaze flicked up, down. Took a slice of Percy's posture and made a decision. "You don't know me," he said, just as softly. "Right," Percy said, and let 3 more kids through while a guard on the street yelled about crosstalk on his radio. Percy timed the radio spikes with the fog's thicker breaths. It was choreography you learn by trial and hope. A man in the back of the holding room panicked properly and shoved. Started the kind of chain reaction that turns purposeful escape into stampede. Percy snapped fingers once. The girl in the sweatshirt snapped her head toward him. He put 2 fingers due WN against the fence like striking a match. She mirrored the motion inside with her hand on her thigh, a signal that said breathe. The shove died an honorable death. Percy didn't smile because it would have broken the spell. The bolt cutters arrived at the same moment the fog got lazy. Percy's teeth ached. The guard swore and swung the cutters wide. The blade bit the lock and skated off with a shriek. Cheap had its merits. North door. Someone barked. Boots scuffed. Bodies pivoted. The loadout shifted away from the alley like a tide that had remembered another moon. Percy eased the fence back into place and wiped the moisture off with his sleeve. He put one hand on Evan's shoulder and didn't push. Go left. 2 blocks. Third door past the mural of the cat-eating Brooklyn. It sticks. Knock twice, then once. Don't say my name you don't know. Evan's mouth pushed toward a smile it didn't commit to. You talk like my sister. Good family trait, Percy said. Go. Evan went. Shoulders down, profile boring. The girl in the sweatshirt followed him without asking permission. The boy with the split lip took rear without being told. The fog thinned. The dampeners, pitch shifted toward smug. Percy stepped away from the fence as the guard finally got the lock to surrender with a scream and a clatter. The chain link yawned open. The room inside bloomed with chaos like mold left out in the sun. Percy kept walking. He turned the corner and bled into a crowd of smokers who were all pretending to vape. He didn't look back. Looking back is a flag. At the end of the block, a man in a suit too nice for the neighborhood leaned on a sedan like the hood owed him money. His hair had that government part. His eyes were too calm for a person. He watched the alley without blinking, like he could will infrared into his skull. Director Halvorsen had never met Percy. He took the kind of breath people take when they're about to end a career politely. He stepped off the car. "Afternoon," he said to no one. And to Percy specifically. "Hell of a fog. City's humid," Percy said, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a folded napkin. He didn't aim his face at the man. He aimed his tone at boredom. "Try a dehumidifier." Quote, "Try consent," Halvorsen said, conversational as a butcher. "We're fond of it." Percy considered exactly 3 choices and picked the only one that wouldn't burn the block down. He made himself smaller in the flow of people, let a UPS dolly shoulder him, bumped a trash can into a wobble and caught it. Halvorsen looked at the wobble. When his eyes came back, Percy was gone. He didn't sprint. He vector changed. 2 alleys, 1 maintenance hatch, a drain that coughed old rain, 1 prayer to a building that had forgotten how to lock its back door. He OD in the dark behind a boiler and felt his heartbeat remind him it preferred slower work. His phone vibrated like a rumor. "You improve as if you were designed to," the text said. "I approve. Keep going. Starve yourself to feed me." He set the phone face down on a pipe and let the words be a patch of mold he refused to scrub today. His other phone, the one he pretended didn't exist, hummed once. "Found. Safe," the text read. "A cat mural is uglier than you promised. M." He let himself grin where no one could use it on him. He typed with his thumb. "Ugly murals save lives. Tell your data analyst to drink water." 3 dots. Then, "She doesn't drink water. She drinks problems. M." Percy pocketed both phones and breathed in boiler heat until the dampeners, headache tone slid down into something his teeth could ignore. He walked out into a street that had decided it was tired of cops and rain and stories, and he blended, and he kept going, because the South Alley had worked and there were always more alleys. The night didn't end. It turned the corner and pretended to be a different street. Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. Paper shields burn. The Midtown lab tried very hard to look like a dentist's office that did blood work. Beige lobby, a plant with leaves too shiny to be real, a hand sanitizer dispenser that beeped cheerfully when it didn't need to. Percy didn't go through the lobby. He went in through a service door the color of resignation and found a corridor groaning with fluorescent light. An exit sign hung crooked, tired of its job. He walked like he belonged. Clipboard under one arm, cheap polo. Badge he'd printed that morning with a logo just wrong enough to be right from 10 feet away. Anyone looking too closely deserved a conversation. 2 floors up, a camera blinked red. He walked under it, counting to 6 like he knew it would pan away on 7. He turned into a stairwell and smelled bleach and metal. His jaw vibrated where the lower grade dampeners kicked on. Nothing like the alley rig. More like a headache that wanted attention but couldn't justify itself. A cleaner pushed a cart out of a door and froze when he saw Percy. He was 60, shoulders wrecked by other people's messes. Eyes that had decided to ignore most things. Percy flipped the clipboard and showed him a work order for an ice machine that didn't exist. The man grunted. 5th floor lounge. The compressor squeals. Always does, Percy said, and kept walking because sometimes not stopping is a permission slip nobody wants to check. He reached the elevator, didn't press the call button, and pried gently at the seam until the doors agreed to shift. He slid into the shaft, planted feet on the maintenance ledge, and rode the counterweight up a floor at a time, every muscle asking if this was worth dying stupid. He listened for the little word that meant proximity sensors, then moved when they were bored. He popped a 2nd floor door and walked into a hallway that didn't know it had a guest. The air changed. Not temperature, texture. That faint itch that says the building has a stomach and it's full of people who shouldn't be there. He followed the itch. At the corner, 2 guards chatted about a game. One of them laughed like he'd borrowed the sound. The other had the comfortable posture of somebody who had never been hit in the face and couldn't imagine why anyone would. Percy tugged the brim of his cap lower and rolled the cart he'd stolen off the cleaner straight at them. "Deliveries are north entrance," the comfortable one said, half turning. "This is a return," Percy said, and kept the wheels moving. He knocked one into the other like they had agreed to square dance. Their arms pinwheeled. He stepped between them as they caught each other, rolled the cart around the corner, and breathed only when the door marked staff only took his badge seriously. Inside, the hum, it crawled over his teeth and settled behind his eyes in a mean little pulse. He swallowed and kept his breath shallow. Dampeners lived here. People did too. He heard voices on the far side of a partition, a soft apology, a brittle reply, the sound of a pen being tapped against a clipboard in the same rhythm as a pulse. He didn't go straight. Straight as for people who own a building. He went left into a supply nook that pretended to be important and was not. He checked the ceiling panel, nudged it. The panel came down with a puff of dust and an aggrieved sigh. He slipped up into the space like a rumor, belly crawled over cables that throbbed with official intent, and found A.G. Rill where air moved and voices came and went like neighbors who didn't know each other's names. "No live rounds, you hearing me?" a woman said below. "This is a study wing, not a black site. Orders say otherwise," a man answered. "Bored. I go with my orders." Percy eased the grill up with 2 fingers and peered through. The room below was glass and benches and plastic chairs with cheerful curves. It had a vending machine full of protein shakes with too many vowels in their names. It also had 20 people wearing the same expression you see on storm windows during hurricane season. Hold, don't break. Wait for the wind to change. Evan sat on a bench with his backpack between his feet and his hands folded on top of it like he'd been taught to behave politely at funerals. He had a band, age on the crook of his elbow and a sticker he hadn't earned that said "Great Patient." He watched the door, not because he expected someone to come for him, but because if someone did, he wanted to be the first to see. Percy slid the grill back into place. He checked the crawlspace for cameras. Nothing. He pulled chalk from his pocket and marked a small circle on the sheetrock that framed the vent. He kissed 2 fingers, pressed them to the chalk, and whispered, "Company." The air between his knuckles and the chalk turned to veil. He slipped his hand through it and pushed. A palm-sized bubble of quiet formed above the room, quieter even than the dampener hum, like he'd shaped the way sound wanted to move. He hadn't tested this trick against hardware like this. He was about to. 3 minutes, he told himself, and rolled backward to a utility ladder he'd clocked earlier. He slid down into a janitor's closet that thought too highly of itself, propped the mop against the door, and stepped into the hallway with a clipboard smile. "Hey," he said to the board guard at the glass room. "Compressor on 5 squealing." "Fantastic," the man said without looking. "Incident report says this is the power branch." "That's not what it says," the man replied. Percy held up the clipboard upside down. The paper was blank. The man didn't look. "Do your thing," the guard said, and returned to picking at his thumb cuticle. Percy found the wall panel he needed, the one a contractor had replaced with a different model a year ago without telling anyone because paperwork is allergic to competence. He loosened the screws, breathed slow, and slid the faceplate away. 2 cables like tired arteries lay side by side. He pressed his fingers between them, finding the narrow lane where hum became just another noise he could talk to. He didn't shove. He asked. The dampener's pulse wavered. It coughed. He timed the cough to the moment a woman at the glass door flashed a badge at the board guar. And he had to look up because his job finally required it. In that half second, the dampener's influence dipped a hair. The bubble of quiet above the room thickened by instinct. The fluorescent lie. TS flickered the way everything flickers when a justification hiccups. Evan felt it. His shoulders lifted 1 notch. He adjusted his grip on the backpack and slid his foot under the bench like he meant to tie his shoe. Percy put the faceplate back and kept walking. "Compressor on 5, he said under his breath, a reminder he didn't need. He had other work. At the end of the hall, a set of Daub. The doors wore a strange lock. Not keycard, not keypad. A smooth square of black sat flush with the wall, no instructions, no blinking lights. It was the kind of device that assumes you're already part of a conversation. Percy lifted his hand, held his palm an inch from the square, and felt heat like a forehead under a fever. The square didn't recognize him. It didn't not recognize him. It asked questions in a language he did not like. The black cube sat on a pedestal beyond those doors, in a room that a tour would call non-invasive observation. The cube asked questions too, but loudly. Mir, I had described it like you describe a nightmare you pretend you don't remember. It's a key, or not. It listens. It might call. Don't touch it. He needed to touch everything around it. He ducked into an office. Logged into a terminal as J. Martin because J. Martin had written his password on a sticky note. CUB3 CUB3. He found the camera grid and taught it a loop. 3 minutes of boredom copied and pasted onto the next 3. And the next. He scrubbed the loop over the cube room like a tablecloth that would pretend spills were wood grain. When the footage played, it would look like a man in a polo cleaning a smudge from a lens and leaving. He walked into the room like that man. The cube was the size of a shoebox and the color of a moonless opinion. It didn't reflect, it absorbed. If you looked long enough, you felt like you were the one being polished to a mirror. He didn't look long. He watched the corners of the room where vents breathed and wires napped. Mira stood in the doorway with a clipboard, as unsurprised as a lamppost. Her jacket was gone. Her shirt sleeves were rolled. Exhaustion made a gentle tangle under her eyes. She watched Percy like you watch a cat that ends a door and you decide not to ask how. You really don't listen, she said, not crossing the threshold. I do, he said. I just don't always agree. You can agree with living, she said. It's underrated. You here to arrest me or to say something useful? Both, she said. Useful first. He splayed his fingers near the pedestal and felt the cubes hum like a subway coming. He made a face. This thing is wrong. That's the technical term, she said, and stepped close enough that he could feel the warmth off her knuckles. She flipped the clipboard to show a line of numbers organized into pane. Signal stratification. It maps crowd effect into a harvestable cascade. A siren that sings people into giving up their minds. Nice, he said. Who built it? She didn't answer. Her eyes were on his fingers. You touch it, you'll meet whatever keeps writing inside it. I'm not shaking hands, he said, and flicked water from nowhere into the seam where the pedestal met the floor. The trickle crawled into a hairline crack like it had been waiting to be walked. He tapped the floor tile twice, lightly, and felt a vibration echo through the room, a feedback he could use later if later existed. Is Evan safe? He asked, more abrupt than he meant it. She blinked. Just once. What do you think I did with him? Got him off a list and into one that only has your name on it, Percy said. Where do you think I put him? She didn't smile. We are very bad at mutual trust. We're decent at mutual outcomes, he said. 2 minutes. Her head tipped, a nod barely there. She put the clipboard against his chest like she was pinning a badge. When this goes to hell, which it will because hell is addicted to labs like this, you get the people out. You do not play hero with the cube. You just said don't touch it, he said. Now you're making me promises about when it explodes. It won't explode, she said. It will. Invite. Invitations make me itchy. Then scratch later, she said. And her voice dropped a half step. You came to liberate. Do it. He left the cube room before the cube taught him to sing. He walked straight back to the glass holding room. The board guard had been replaced by a different shape of board, the kind that bookmarked legal briefings and called them bedtime stories. Percy didn't try to sell him a compressor. Fire drill, he said flatly. Evac route rerouted. You sit tight, it's your job. I open, it's my job. Look at your manual. The guard reached for a binder he'd never read and found the tab titled Fire Procedures because people write the answers for him. Percy took his key ring off the desk with 2 fingers while the binder's pages made the right noises. He lifted the keys high enough for the camera loop to swallow, then palmed the one that mattered. He slid it into the door lock and turned. Sir, the guard said, alarm late. A water sprite the size of a coffee mug launched out of a ventilation grate and slapped the binder's spine. The binders in this building were cheap. The rings sprung. Papers smashed into the guard's lap like a legal blizzard. He cursed and knelt to gather forms that didn't know the alphabet. Percy opened the door and stepped inside. 20 pairs of eyes turned like iron filings to a magnet. Okay, he said, quiet enough to press calm into skin. If you can stand, you're about to walk. If you can't, you're about to be carried. No shouting, no victory laps. We leave like a boring mistake. The shaved head girl stood. Evan stood without looking at Percy. An older man with a bro. Ken Knuckle muttered something about miracles and was shushed with a look by a teenager who had decided he was not dying in a lab today. A siren chirped twice, the sound a building makes when it's asked. In a question it already knows the answer to. Myra's voice snapped over the wing speakers. Protocol drill, she lied beautifully. Follow staff instructions. No running. North stairwell is closed for maintenance. Use west. The bored new guard lifted his head and realized there were people in motion where there should not be. He put his hand on his radio and spoke into it a second too late. We've got. Percy met him at the threshold, soft and professional. Wrong channel, he said, and tapped the radio. Water popped inside the speaker like a bubble. The radio hissed, sulked, died. Hey, the guard said, reaching for Percy's shoulder. Percy didn't elbow him. He guided the man's arm past him and let the guard's momentum plant him on his own chair. Stay, Percy said, like to a dog he liked. He took point. He walked the evac line past a glass wall behind which the black cube waited like a toothache. The dampener hum climbed, offended. He felt the wrongness reach like a taste you can't spit out. The hallway by the west stairwell bloomed with people in vests. Mira stood with them, clipboard tucked away, jacket back on like the uniform could save her from bureaucracy. She ignored Percy completely while stepping back 2 paces to open space just where he needed it. 2 lanes, she told her team. This is a study wing. We move at study speed. Smile like you're not paid enough for the opposite. The team nodded because they liked her. Percy slid the evacuees past, keeping his shoulder just far enough from hers that cameras would have to invent a conspiracy. Evan went by in the middle. Backpack still a small wall between him and the world. Percy let his fingers brush the fabric at the exact moment Evan shifted it higher and no one could say the contact had happened. South exit is unjammed, Percy said like he was reciting inventory. If anyone asks, a compressor squealed and you solved it. Always do, Mira said without moving her mouth. They hit the stairwell. The dampeners pitched up to nosebleed territory. Percy flinched and masked it as a cough. The air turned thin and heavy at once. The evac line staggered a step. Keep your head, he said, a tone more than words. He put his palm against the metal railing. It stung. He slid a thin film of water along it like a second skin, let it wick the heat, let the dampeners chew on the film instead of the people. The hum bit the wrong thing and got distracted being proud about it. First landing, second landing, third, almost clean. Then the building decided to be itself. A door above boomed open, to say. Security contractors poured in with urgency they'd practiced in mirrors, and Director Halvorson's voice filtered from above like the building had grown a conscience that charged per hour. Hold position, Halvorson said. Calm, friendly, deadly. Study subjects remain on site until cross-check. We have had an intrusion. Percy put a hand out and the evac line stopped like a tail stopping with the head. He sized the landing. 4 steps down, 8 up, a pipe along the ceiling, a sprinkler head that looked old enough to vote in 2 countries. Mira brushed past him, not touching. She held up her own badge like it was church. Post-incident evacuation is my call, she said to the contractors. Study subjects are study subjects until they're people again. That's above your pay grade and mine. We have to cross-check. One contractor recited, unhappily. Great, Mira snapped. Check me. She turned in a slow circle like a runway model in a vest. See, human. The rest are tired. Move. Hal. Vorson arrived at the top of the stairs like a well-dressed storm cell. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He looked down the spine of the line, found Percy's face, and didn't blink. Contain, he said, and the word was policy and prayer. Let them go, Mira said without looking up. You want to brief the Oversight Committee on why you invoked lethal measures in a study wing after a bridge incident that already has you on cable news. You like your job. You like jobs as a category. Halvorson shifted 2%. It was enough. The contractors hesitated in that complicated way people hesitate. Taewen Law and Conscience high-five once in a hallway. Percy didn't waste the window. He raised one hand as if to check the sprinkler head. He twitched his fingers. The sprinkler coughed rusty water. For the first time in a decade and baptized everyone. The dampeners took the wet like a dare and wasted a second deciding how to punish it. The evac line moved. Feet thundered, but not like a stampede. Like a promise to keep standing somewhere else. Percy kept pace with Evan, letting the boy's speed set the rhythm. "Don't you dare," Halvorsen said, now to Mira, now to the world. "Write me up," Mira said, and walked backward down a step so she could keep her eyes on both men, which was a trick of its own. "I love memos." They made it to the ground floor. The air felt like someone had turned the volume down on pain. Percy guided the line into a corridor that spit them into the alley with the south gate. This time, the lock didn't argue. It had learned humility when it jammed earlier. 2. Community services vans sat with their doors open like mouths ready to tell better stories. A woman with a clipboard identical to Myra's but with a different letterhead waved them forward like traffic was an act of mercy. "Straight on," she said to the group, voice the exact volume that cuts through fear without scaring it. "You'll be processed by people who aren't paid enough to lie to you. If anyone offers you water that tastes like tin, spit it out." Next, the shaved-head girl looked Percy in the eye as she passed him and did a little chin lift that translated universally to "Good job, idiot." Evan didn't give him anything but a brush of air where a nod might have been. Percy respected it. He waited until the last of them had loaded, then he turned back toward the building because the job wasn't done. The cube room still existed. An ugly hum threaded the air. He could feel Isari's attention like a draft under a door. Mira grabbed his sleeve, quick. His skin read her intent before his mind had time for debate. "No," she said. "I'm not touching it," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "It will touch you." He patted her hand once, and it was the kind of touch that doesn't get people killed. "I know." They went anyway. Back in the cube room, the loop was still running. The cameras saw a guy who cleaned and left. The cube saw something else. It pulsed in a way you felt in the back of your eyes. And it tasted like panic from the bridge and the courthouse and 100 other rooms where people had been told to wait quietly until someone better decided to consider them. Percy stood in the doorway. He did not cross the threshold. He let his breath find low tide. He rubbed his thumb and index finger together until his nerves remembered they were his. Then he took the bottle of water from his pocket, unscrewed the cap, and poured a careful line onto the floor in front of the pedestal. The water ran to the crack he had found, slid into it like a whisper. He tapped the tile twice. The vibration answered. The cube flared like a pupil dilating and then narrowing as if it had found light it hadn't asked for. "Don't engage," Mira said. "Let it think you're boring. You say that like it's a skill," he said, and lifted his hand to the glass. He didn't touch. He watched the cube's edges blur, then sharpen. A voice arrived, not in his head and not in the room. Somewhere in the shape of the world that folds when a thing is talking to the part of you that believes in maps. It said, "Vessel." It said, "Meat." "No," Percy said, out loud, to a block of nothing. "Bad time." It ignored him. A plane of black peeled off the cube and hovered like a sheet of paper persuaded to forget gravity. It drifted toward the glass, bumped, tested, withdrew. It was curious. It was hungry. It was starving in a way you don't fix with sandwiches. "Halvorsen," Mira said, looking at the ceiling, "if you're listening on the parabolic, tell your people to power down Node C. If you don't, we're about to give every emergency room in a 10-block radius a migraine without a cause." Halvorsen said nothing, which meant he was listening. Percy could feel the building holding its breath like a person who wanted to see someone else blink first. He didn't wait for permission. He curled his fingers and made a line of fog between the pedestal and the cube, thin, like a spider line. He set it moving not back and not forth but sideways, a current that didn't exist until he made it. The black plane leaned into it. It drifted, then drifted faster, then found itself obeying a force it didn't recognize and disliked. Percy didn't push harder. He made the line patient and inevitable. "Percy," Mira said warningly. "It wants to study me," he said. "Let it study a cross breeze." The cube hissed in a way that wasn't a sound. It did something smart. It tried to ride the line back to the source to climb into the hand that made it. Percy smiled without teeth. He let the line lead not to him but to the crack he had primed with water. The black plane slipped into the seam. The floor swallowed it with a damp smack that left a shadow he didn't want to consider too long. Now, Percy said, to nobody he could name, shut it. The lights went out. Not all of them. Just enough to make everyone remember what dark felt like before it got invented into a setting. The dampeners coughed, then died. And in that silence the cube pulsed once like a heart that wanted to be a god and then went flat. Myra's radio crackled with someone swearing because their board had gone Christmas tree and back again. She exhaled in a single syllable that might have been relief. We're done, she said. We're gone. Percy nodded. He didn't need to be told twice. They left one at a time, King a pace that made any camera footage look like boredom. When they hit the corridor, Halvorsen stood there with his hands folded and his face wearing the kind of politeness they use at high-level funerals. I assume there will be a report, he said. Can't wait to read it, Mira said. You compromised a study wing, Halvorsen said to Percy. Your study wing compromised itself, Percy said. You were sold a box that turns fear into fuel and you plugged it into the building because you like lights. Halvorsen tilted his head. You talk like you believe in unregulated kindness. Percy started walking. I believe in people leaving a building while they still like themselves. Stand by, Halvorsen said, and 3 men stepped into the corridor from somewhere that had previously not had doors. Kai was not one of them. The men wore the blank competence of contractors who get paid extra to keep their faces empty. Contain, Halvorsen said, for the second time that day. No, Mira said. It wasn't loud. It was a line on a map you don't cross without changing countries. My team. My call. If you want to make a scene, try it at the top of the stairs where the cameras are honest. The contractors, mercenaries, looked at Halvorsen. He looked back at them with the small smile of a man who will ask them to do the same thing tomorrow if they fail today. They didn't move. Nobody did. Percy lifted 2 fingers and flicked a bead of water into the fire alarm's throat. The alarm had not been inspected in a while. It took offense easily. It screamed. Doors opened. People spilled. Clipboards flew. Somebody's coffee baptized someone's report. The building remembered it was full of witnesses and the contract muscle remembered lawsuits. Later then, Halvorsen said, as if rescheduling lunch. Later, Percy said, because if he said anything else he would say something he couldn't take back. They found a side exit with a door that had a footprint on it from 10 years ago and added one. Outside, the city had the grace to be raining for real this time, not pipes and tricks. Percy let it soak his hair flat and scrub the building off his skin. Mira stood under the tiny awning and watched the rain like it owed her an apology. She gave Percy something wrapped in a cheap napkin. It was heavy and angular and black. You said don't touch it, he said, startled. This isn't the cube, she said. It's a key. It wants a conversation with a thing I don't intend to introduce it to. I am giving it to you because you are the only person I've seen in 2 months who doesn't immediately treat strange power like a bargain. He made a face. That's a terrible reason. That's the reason I have, she said. Change my mind. He slid the napkin into his jacket, not against his skin. Where's Evan? Gone, she said. Where he goes is not a thing I will tell you because I like both of you alive. You gonna get fired? He asked. She considered it. I'm going to get memos. She looked at the rain again. And if I see your face on my next assignment brief labeled, Asset of Interest, I'm going to write the world's most creative resignation letter and deliver it with fireworks. He couldn't help it. He laughed. Tired and relieved and stupid. That I want to see. She looked at him like maybe, eventually, she might show him things on purpose. Don't make me regret trusting you, she said. I have a small budget for regret and I'm saving it for my brother's inevitable bad tattoo. Tell him to get something boring, Percy said. A toaster. A spreadsheet. I'll tell him you said that, she said dryly. He'll never listen to anyone again. The rain thickened into something that made even New York consider umbrellas. She stepped out from the awning, didn't put one up. Go home, she said. Or wherever you pretend that is. Protocol's still here, he said, nodding toward the building. So am I, she said, and walked back inside like a person who knew exactly how much longer she could keep a job while doing it in a way that didn't make her hate mirrors. Percy stood until she was swallowed by beige and buzz. He pulled the napkin-wrapped key from his pocket and felt the way it vibrated against his palm like a tiny animal you weren't supposed to feed. He slid it away again before it could learn him. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the river. He didn't know if it was weather or Kai. He let the rain tell him it was the first, because a lie that's soft as a mercy. He turned his feet toward the avenue and took the long way, because he needed to be a person before he did the next thing, and the long way is how you remember what that feels like. Halfway down the block, his phone buzzed like a cricket that didn't know it lived in a pocket. Text. No name. You keep choosing people over prizes. Tiresome. Useful. Hunger adjusts. He didn't answer. He let the words register and then be carried away by the rain, the way ink runs off paper until a meaning's edges go soft. Another text. This one with a name. You're ridiculous. He typed without thinking. You say that like a compliment. She replied. It's not. I owe you one. Don't spend it badly. He slid the phone away. The black key weighed the jacket down like an idea he couldn't put back on the shelf. He touched his chest through cotton. The mark was quiet, not kind, just quiet. He caught a crosstown bus on reflex and sat in the back where he could see exits and the way strangers held their bags. The driver drove like the road was a negotiation. An old couple argued about crossword clues in a way that meant they were fine. A kid built a city out of 2 napkins and a straw and declared it fireproof. Outside, the lab's windows reflected rain and themselves in nothing that looked like people. Inside, in a room with glass and a dead cube, a line of damp spread along a crack and stopped exactly where it had been told to. Percy closed his eyes and counted the beats between the bus's wiper strokes until the city turned into street he recognized as his. He got off 2 stops early on purpose and walked the rest, because showing up direct is a habit he doesn't want other people to learn. He cut past a mural of a cat eating Brooklyn and laughed to himself for a reason the rain tried to dilute and failed. He reached his door with water in his shoes, shook them off like a dog had decided to be a person when it was convenient, and locked the lock, then the other lock, then the little chain that turns the door into a joke. He put the black key on the table and stared at it until a headache started behind his eyes. He said out loud, "You do not get to name me." He didn't know if the key heard. He didn't ask. He shoved it into a drawer with a roll of tape and a bag of rice and a baseball from a game he hadn't actually attended. He closed the drawer gently, because everything else had been hard today and something should be easy. The city outside coughed up a siren. He imagined it belonged to a firefighter who would find a door unlocked that should have been locked and say thanks to nobody. He let that be enough to breathe easier. He texted Naruto a photo of steamed dumplings he had not yet ordered, because he'd said he would send a picture if he didn't die. Naruto sent back a photo of instant ramen with a raw egg cracked in it and the caption "Chef's Kiss." Percy laughed alone in a room where he liked the echoes. He set an alarm for too early and lay on the couch without turning the light off. The rain drummed its own problems into the street. Somewhere across the island, a swordsman watched a loop of footage and frowned because something didn't fit. Somewhere else, a director wrote a memo that sounded like law and felt like regret. In a drawer, a black key considered him like a machine considers heat. Percy let his eyes close. He didn't fall asleep so much as he let go of a rope he'd been holding since the bridge and trusted that the floor would be there when he hit it. Tomorrow would not ask for less. He didn't want it to. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Thunder without rain. The rooftop was hot like a griddle and the sky forgot how to be a sky. No clouds. No cover. Just lightning lancing from nowhere to nowhere, the sound lagging by a full breath as if the city were listening before it decided to be scared. Kai landed on the gravel the kind of grace that makes gymnasts hate you. He didn't bother with the elevator door. He came over the parapet in a silver flick and drew steel that hummed like a happy neon sign. "Last time you sprinted," he said. "Today, we finish the conversation." Percy set the napkin-wrapped key on the HVAC casing and rolled his shoulders. "Your building's having a migraine." "That's not my building," Kai said, and then he moved. The first cut wasn't a cut. It was a pressure shift. Percy ducked and the blade traced air where his ear had been, the thunder halo singeing the edge of his jacket. Caw! I flowed through the mist like he'd planned it. Stomp stepped into a short strike that tried to crack Percy's knee from a rude angle. Percy bent the wrong way on purpose, slid, and let a slick of humie. Did he become a skid that dropped him a meter to the left? Footwork improved, Kai said, circling. He didn't do banter. He did analysis that sounds like banter if you like him. Yours talks too much, Percy said, and flicked 2 fingers. A water edge squeezed into being and snapped toward Kai's wrist. Kai twitched the blade, a minimal parry, the edge alive with a crackle that evaporated Percy's strike before it kissed skin. You're leading with tricks. I'm leading with not dying, Percy said, and drove a palm into the rooftop gravel. Damp crawled out of the concrete like it remembered rain. He swept it up, spun it once, and called a racenblade into his right hand. A disc, not quite a disc, a nerve-singing buzz of water held cruelly still by will. He didn't throw it, he held it near the body, ready to cut close and ruin errors. Kai saw the choice and smiled the way you do when you've found the part of the chessboard that matters. Don't lose your hand, he said. Don't lose your face, Percy returned, and went in. Close in work is ugly. Done right, it looks like luck. Percy kept the blade near his hip, slashed on a pivot to force Kai's step, clipped the edge of a billboard frame. The disc shuddered, tried to explode into a spray that would do nothing but impress the wrong audience. Percy fed it calm. It stilled, wincing. He set it at jaw height and dragged it across empty air where Kai's head had been. Kai short-stepped, lightning popping under his boots, the crackle grounding into rebar. His sword snapped down and up in a draw cut too quick to narrate. Percy caught it flat on with the racenblade's rim and learned exactly how much lightning hates being touched by water that refuses to be steam. Do you always pick fights under weird weather? Percy asked, breath even. I pick fights where people can't get killed watching, Kai said. And where I can see you coming if you run. I'm not running, Percy said, and feinted. Shoulder, knee, a glance at the key he shouldn't have glanced at. Kai took the bait. He slid to block the line to the HVAC and Percy spun low, heel scything. Kai rode the sweep, hopped it, blade and body a single argument. Respect, Percy said. Likewise, Kai said, and then the world glitched. A new bolt speared the rooftop antenna with a sound that wasn't thunder. It was a wet, metallic thunk that rattled teeth. The air taste. D immediately wrong. Ozone plus something clinical, harvested, as if the lightning had been convinced to be helpful to the wrong cause. Percy felt the mark flare under his collarbone, a hot geometry pushing to make a point. He throttled it. Don't, he told it, out loud. Kai didn't miss the order to nobody. His eyes sharpened. What is that thing? An excuse, Percy said. I try not to use it. Kai lunged. Percy slid back and the racenblade wobbled, edges whining. It wanted to bloom. The wrongness from the sky leaned into the wobble like a coach telling a player to go for it. Percy kept it in the pocket. Forced breath all the way down, found lighthouse stillness, and the blade agreed to behave a little longer. Kai clocked the restraint. He adjusted. He stopped trying to knock the blade free and started trying to knock Percy off the line that let him keep it. Smart. He feinted a high slash, re-angled to a shoulder check, then threaded the sword between them so that Percy had to step or wear it. Percy stepped, through his own body. He left a clone on the spot, skin flickering with mist as if condensation had learned to be a boy. Kai's blade went clean through peach fuzz and steam. The clone grinned like it had never been alive and popped. Water splashed the gravel. Percy reappeared behind Kai's right shoulder and tapped the base of the swordsman's hilt with the flat of the racenblade. The jolt marched up Kai's forearm. He swore, blade dipping, and Percy used the breath to get distance. Better, Kai said. He sounded delighted and annoyed, the fine mix you get when you realize an opponent is forcing you to grow in public. No civilians, Percy reminded him. None, Kai said, and then he slid his lead foot, lightning tucking itself into his ankle muscles. The air hissed where he moved. He cut a diagonal that would have shaved the edge of the world if Percy hadn't met it with his disc and refused to let physics do anything but sulk. They locked a second. A second is forever in this work. In that forever, They both felt the rooftop pitch, just a hair, like the building had sighed. The lightning kept coming without clouds to birth it. It aimed near them, not at them. Bait, Percy said. You feel that? Kai said. Yes, and neither of them said what it meant. The stairwell door banged open. Mira came through first, sweat drying on her neck from stairs she'd taken with intent. A small metal case in one hand and annoyance in the other. Two suit guys tried to shoulder past her and regretted it when she stopped with the precise amount of resistance required to embarrass them. She ignored Kai's sword. She ignored the Rasen blade. She walked straight into their fight line and set the case down on the tar paper like she was about to serve dessert. You're both exhausting, she said. Stop posturing. Look. Kai didn't take his eyes off Percy. We were in the middle of a draw, she said, flat. Congratulations, duelists. Consider it an omen and not an identity. She flipped the case. Inside sat a compact projector the color of nothing much, a cable with a port that matched the black key in Percy's jacket too precisely to be coincidence, and a bundle of wires that had been loved into function with tape and profanity. Percy kept the blade steady with his left hand and with his right fished the key from his pocket. Thought you didn't want me touching this. I don't, she said, and snatched it from him with two fingers like it was biohazard and glass both. I want you anchoring the wind if this goes loud. She slotted the key. The projector hummed a note that made Percy's sinuses ache. Light spilled not upward but outward, a dome of thin lattice that shivered like fish scale. Across it, points lit in sequence: bridge, courthouse, lab. Bedford. Then newer points he didn't recognize lit with equal appetite: stadium, hospital, subway, not a megachurch in a repurposed theater. Lines arced between them in harvest curves. Kai's sword dipped. What am I looking at? Feeding map, Mira said. Not rumor, not guess. Pattern off the cube and a dozen echoes of it nodding in places that insist they don't have cubes. Percy leaned in, Rasenblade whining at the edge of his hearing. Storms with no clouds. Panic events with cameras prepositioned. Raids timed to the hour with maximum spectators. Someone's laying out a buffet. Not someone, Kai said. Eyes on the pulse at the center of the web. Something. Lightning stabbed a vent 5 feet away and turned metal into bright, furious confetti. The lattice didn't flinch. It brightened. Myra's voice went softer. Nodes live now. Whatever's riding the weather wants you two to swing first so it can drink from the crowd you'll make. Kai resheathed in a single clean motion, as if the decision had been waiting at the back of his throat. Then we don't swing. The wind changed. Not direction. Mood. Percy felt the mark flare again, then point, an instinctual tilt toward a new pulse northeast. The lattice synced. A new node pulsed on the projection like a heartbeat under wallpaper. The timing said 10 minutes. The location said open air night market. Mira caught his glance. If we leave now, we get there when it starts. If we leave in 5, we get there when it's news. Percy let the Rasenblade unravel. He caught the collapse with both hands so it went to mist instead of spray. When he could hear again, he realized his fingers were shaking. He set them on the HVAC casing. The tar smelled like baked asphalt and weird lightning. Kai watched Percy's hands and didn't comment. He tapped a message into his phone with quick, economic thumbs. My sister got a summons to council for the same hour, he said. Coincidence is what you call it before you've lived through it twice. I'm getting her away from it. Percy nodded. Good. Mira packed the projector with professional haste, but she didn't hide what her face was doing around the edges. I'll take the west approach, she said. I can cut their grid if I'm lucky. Lucky. Meaning, underfunded and very fast. You're not coming alone, Kai said. Like hell, Mira said, surprising nobody. I have a.t.m. on the next block and an overqualified intern who thinks I'm joking when I say, bring the analog kit. Kai raised a brow. Analog. Paper maps, Mira said, and slotted the case shut. Scissors. String. Radios that don't handshake with anything smart enough to learn our names. Percy picked up the key. It thrummed against his palm like a small animal that wanted milk. He slid it into his pocket and retied his jacket knot with the same motion. I can pull crowd, he said. Make exits. Keep heads up. You can be bait, Kai said. Difference is whether I survive it, Percy said. I do, we win. I don't, You cut a god with lightning and the city writes metaphors you hate for a week. Charming, Kai said. True, Percy said. Lightning didn't stop. It never hit them. It framed them in long, dangerous strokes. The man in the next building over lit a cigarette on a balcony and then thought better of it and went inside without finishing. On streets nobody used for traffic anymore, pigeons decided to be somewhere else. Mira checked the horizon like she was reading a graph only she could see. 2 rules, she said. No deaths you can help. No speeches you can't finish. Percy almost saluted her with the rasenblade before remembering he'd let it go. He settled for a nod. Fair. She started for the door, then stopped. One more thing. She stepped back into Percy's space, sunny as a knife. With 2 fingers she touched the place over his collarbone where the mark pretended to be quiet. The pressure of the lightning made the skin there buzz. You're scaring the right people, she said. Don't let it teach you to scare yourself. His mouth twitched. I'll write that on a pillow. I'll sell it on Etsy, she said, and was gone, suit guys in tow like offended geese that couldn't help following her. Kai waited a beat. You're sure about her? No, Percy said, but I like the way my outcomes look when she's nearby. Good, Kai said, and sent his text. His phone immediately vibrated. He read, mouth line going hard. She's already out the door. That was quick. She trusts you, Percy said. She trusts my blade, Kai said. Which is the same thing some days. They stood one more heartbeat in the unsky while the city tried to decide whether it would remember this weather as rare or prophetic. The mark rolled under Percy's skin like something trapped in the tide. He didn't let it steer his feet. He let it be a bad passenger while he drove. Call it, Percy said. Kai hopped the parapet. Stairs are slow. You like slow. Sometimes, Percy said, and jumped. They took the fire escapes like competent idiots, 3 buildings across, down a ladder that cringed under their weight, across a clothesline alley where a sheep tried to become a ghost and failed. On the second block, a kid on a skateboard rolled backward out of a dream and watched them sprint by with the calm of someone who had decided to be unshockable in middle school. Markets this way, Kai said, cutting left. I know, Percy said. I can taste it. Kai glanced once, measuring whether that was a joke. Don't eat it, he advised. Not hungry, Percy said, and the mark high. SSED like a cat behind the bars that weren't bars. They hit street level near a mural of a caribou wearing headphones. The air had started to gather the way a crowd gathers before it knows it's a crowd. You can feel it in how people stop apologizing for taking up space. Stalls chattered open. A radio from 1997 played something with too much bass and all the right intention. Light strings blinked, in a pattern that didn't match the weather. Myra's voice ghosted Percy's phone in a text. Westgrid cut in 3. Tight windows. Nod if you see me. He didn't. He nodded anyway. Kai edged his sword deeper under his jacket. We'll be gentle, he said. Percy cracked his neck. Small, one side then the other, like he was settling into a seat nobody else wanted to sit in. We'll be fast. He looked up. The lightning had moved off the rooftop and onto the idea of the city. It arced between lampposts like a corridor, hopping from metal to metal, never quite grounding, as if it were scouting for a frame. For a second, the world hung on the thin line between ordinary and a story you tell wrong if you tell it proud. Let's go, Percy said. They went. Chapter 4 end. Chapter 5. Broken Counsel. The courthouse had that old city dignity judges love and scaffolding that said a pigeon won a war. Percy walked up the steps in a borrowed blazer over a t-shirt because the invite said, Joint Security. Why Summit? And nothing says security like pretending you own a pocket square. Mira stood at the metal detector, arguing softly with a wand that wanted to be a violin. It's not a weapon, she told the guard. It's a radio that refuses to die. She turned, clocked Percy, and flicked her eyes toward the far door. Right gallery, 3rd row. Don't be interesting. I'm not capable, he said, and kept moving. Inside. Long benches, old wood, cheap microphones that gave you the hum of a beehive even when nobody spoke. On the left, Aegis in suits. On the right, a cluster of gods disguised as people. Hermes with his sneakers tucked away in loafers he hated. Athena looking like a lawyer who'd brought her own courtroom. A lesser river deity scrolling discreetly on a phone made of light. In the center, A handful of shinobi envoys in civilian clothes that didn't quite hide how they carried themselves. Director Halvorsen sat behind a slim table as if the wood had been built to his measurements. He wore no tie and all the comfort. He rested a file folder on the table and didn't open it. He didn't need to. Kai took a seat 2 rows ahead of Percy. He didn't look back. His blade was a rumor today. His hair was almost polite. He texted someone, thumb quick. Probably his sister. Probably a warning disguised as a joke. A bailiff, mortal and tired, read an opening that had been written by 3 committees and 1 poet who had given up. We convened to discuss protocols for non-human event containment, interjurisdictional cooperation. Halvorsen cut in without standing. Plain speech works. We have an anomaly vector and rising casualty potential. Aegis proposes standardization. The council proposes tradition. Athena smiled like a scalpel. We propose order. Order with ornamental tethers, Halvorsen said mildly. You cage, we catalog. Only one of us writes reports that survive depositions. A shinobi envoy. Woman in her 30s, hair neat, posture perfect, tapped a finger on the bench. You mean, only one of you gets sued in broad daylight. Which is why you're all here, Halvorsen said. He tapped the folder, still closed. Shared risk, shared rules. Percy watched faces instead of words. Myra's jaw flexed once when Halvorsen used shared. Hermes bounced one heel precisely enough to count. Kai sat too still. In the back, a man with a council badge wore an expression that belonged to someone who'd already chosen a side and hoped nobody noticed until it was late. A screen lowered. The drone footage from the bridge debate session popped up. The spiral brace, the bus. The moment Percy's skin had lit with a geometry he would not lend a name. Nobody said, vessel. Nobody had to. The room felt the word anyway. Here's your hazard, Halvorsen said, voice the right kind of calm for the wrong kind of pitch. Unlicensed power manifestation tied to unknown imprint. Civilian rescue performed without collateral, commendable. Subsequent illusion of oversight, less so. This is what we must standardize. Athena tilted her head at Percy like she was adjusting a lens. Bring the boy forward. Pass, Percy said, not raising his voice. Every head turned. He wasn't a defendant. He'd sat where the cameras would have to try hard to find him. It didn't matter. The word, boy, traveled with its own leash and he cut it with the single syllable. Hermes grinned into his knuckles. Halvorsen didn't smile at all. Mira looked at her knees like they'd just told a joke she wasn't supposed to enjoy. Percy stood. Walking forward looked like surrender. Not walking looked like fear. He walked sideways. Along the aisle, to a space between tables that made microphones remember they had cords. I'm here to talk safe harbor, he said. For the people you moved last night. Evacuees. Study subjects. Call them what makes you behave, but get them somewhere that isn't a rumor with locks. Harbor requires rules, Athena said. Harbor without rules becomes piracy. Good line, Percy said. You practice that one at weddings. Hermes laughed softly. Athena did not. A gray-robed miner attached to the council, scribe, clerk, power vacuum, lifted a sealed slip and read without being asked. The council proposes a binding seal to stabilize the anomaly until risk models reduce. Not happening, Percy said. The seal, the scribe continued, will limit voluntary expression of extranormal capacity within council jurisdiction. So you want to leash him, the shinobi envoy translated, lack of ornament her ornament. He's not a pet, Kai said, before he decided to. It surprised everyone, including himself. Halvorsen drummed one finger once, then stopped as if it had cost him money. This is unproductive. Let us revisit. Later. Play the courthouse tape. A second V. Deo rolled. Body cam angles from the sabotage last week. The dampener field, the siphon snap. People staggered to the exit, faces pale under emergency fluorescence. In the corner of a frame, a node GE. Narrator blinked status lights like ambition. Someone had used Aegis hardware to piggyback Isari's drink straw. Mira spoke for the first time. I'm not arguing ghosts. I'm stating. Splinter network. Orders routed around me and sent through people who collect paychecks that don't belong to this building. Disavowed, Halvorsen said, smooth. We'll find them. And if we find out a god signed the authorization? She asked. Athena smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the bench. We do not sign small things. Then your pen belongs to someone else today, Mira said evenly. The room didn't buzz. The room drew breath and waited. Outside, tires hissed on wet streets. Lightning had moved on. The sky above the skylight was a flat mirror. The lights went out. Not end of meeting out. Not power company out. The kind of out that starts from the edges and moves in, as if a hand cupped the building and decided to make a point. Backup strips flickered to amber and held. Node, Mira said, already moving. She didn't look at Halvorsen. She looked at the ceiling, at the corners, at the places where you hide equipment you shouldn't have. Halvorsen didn't move at all. Hold positions. A tone slid into the air from nowhere obvious. The hairs on Percy's arms stood. Dampener, but tuned. Not the blunt headache hum. A finer frequency, settling into bodies like silt. Phones down, Kai snapped, already pocketing his. If it's a siphon, the cameras are the altar. People looked for exits. People always do. That's where panic finds its stage. The clerk grabbed papers that didn't matter. He, RMES pinched the bridge of his nose like he'd smelled a lie. The shinobi envoy went still in a way that makes a threat die in its cradle. Halvorsen, Mira said, and now she looked at him. Tell me why. Oh, you didn't authorize a dampener in a courthouse. He didn't answer. Which answered? Percy smelled the water in the building before he saw the hardware. The courthouse was old. Its guts were copper, ND iron and 1,000 leaks that had learned discretion. You could do a lot with a place like that if you didn't mind being ugly. The siphon popped awake. You couldn't see it. You felt it. Attention bending. 1,000 small eyes turned without agreement. Percy tasted the cube's cousin in the way his tongue went numb. He didn't ask permission. He moved. Stairs. He called. Not shouting, not calm. Just a tone that tells spooked horses how to back away from a cliff. Make room. He threw a veil down the center aisle with both hands like a runner laying a rope. The veil wasn't water and wasn't air. It was a way for sight to slip sideways, a path that turned faces into blurs that didn't feed fear. People stepped into it and stopped being part of the story the room wanted. Aegis muscle IED to plant their boots in the aisle and call it security. Percy shouldered one aside, not hostile, decisive. Move, he said, live. The man moved. It isn't magic. It's posture and the way a voice hits bone. At the back corner, where a portrait of a judge glowered at a century that hadn't asked for it, a vent sang just off the tone of all the other vents. Percy followed it through a side door, into a service corridor that had forgotten its name. There, tucked into a maintenance alcove behind a wire rack of old event signage, a black node stood on a tripod like a photographer who hated people. Found you, Percy said. The node whined, proud of itself. The air around it looked normal. The feeling did not. Panic is contagious. The node had learned to be a sneeze. He didn't smash it. He could have. He didn't know what backflow would do. He flooded the floor. Water climbed from the baseboards and the broken throat of a mop sink and the forgotten condensation tray of an old ice machine. It rose gentle and sure, waist high in a breath, clear as apology. He kept it still with a thought that tasted like the tunnel lesson, not a prison company. The node sat in the middle of a new tea, ink like a black fish that had never seen its reflection. He cupped his palm, spun, and pressed. The water tightened around the node into a cage, not touching the hardware, a skin away. Sound bent. Wine dropped into a muffled complaint. The siphon's pull staggered. Need voltage, Percy said into air that carried, and turned back toward the courtroom. Kai heard him from 2 hallways away. He came through a side door like thunder behaved for him, controlled, contained. He didn't ask questions. He saw the tank, the node, the way the air trembled around both, and understood his part. Ground, he asked. Percy slid a silver thread of water to the steel shelving, down to the floor grating, out to a radiator that had dreamed of being useful for 30 years. There. Kai took a breath like a swimmer at the edge of a race and put the sword's tip into the water without breaking the cage's skin. He didn't hurl lightning. He fed it like wire feeds a bulb. A line of white crawled from steel to surface and stayed. Stubborn and pure. The node's status lights danced through 3 colors like a tantrum. The pitch climbed, then choked. Plastic sizzling is its own language. The siphon slipped. The ground shook. Not earthquake. Intention. Above, in the gallery, someone screamed once and then made it useful by helping a stranger stand. Mira slid in, jacket half off, mic clipped to a collar that didn't care. "I've got 2 more on the mezzanine," she said, breath sharp. "We kill this one, I can cut the others from the grid. But if we pop all at once, the backflow feeds the thing we're starving," Percy finished. "One at a time. Who authorized this?" the shinobi envoy asked from the doorway, voice quiet and sharp enough to shave God. She met Halvorson's eyes because he had finally moved. "Splinter," he said, calm, still formal. "Everybody's favorite excuse." "From where?" she pressed. Halvorson gave a little shrug that didn't belong in a courthouse. "Anonymous directive. Divine routing." He tilted his head toward the gallery without looking at a single god. "We share risk, remember." Athena didn't flare. She went cold. "Name the route." Halvorson smiled with his mouth. "I would if I could. But I can't." Which is either convenient or true. He looked at the tank like he was measuring it for purchase. "Finish up. You're dripping on the foundations." Kai pushed. More charge until the black box hiccuped a small white spark and died. Percy let the water sink just enough that the cage still existed without courting a spill. He didn't trust the quiet. He'd learned better. He stepped toward the door and the karma bit. Not a flare. A bite. A grab at the shoulder muscles. A tug on the wrist angle. A nudge of the knee that said, "Turn 15 degrees and cut th. Human in front of you because the quickest way out is through and that is efficiency." The geometry lit under his skin with a purr like a knife being sharpened. He stopped. It tried to keep him moving. A puppet string made of math and hunger. He made a clone. The clone looked at him, eyes clear as mirrors. Percy stabbed it in the chest. Water popped. The backlash shocked his elbow into remembering it belonged to him. The mark hissed and recoiled like a cat that had been sprayed. It didn't leave. It sulked. "Problem?" Kai asked. Crisp, eyes on the hallway. "Handled," Percy said. He didn't meet anyone's gaze for 1 second because he didn't want to see worry he'd have to argue with. 2 more nodes, Mira said, already moving. "Mezzanine. East and west." "We'll take east," Kai said. "I'll drown west," Percy said. They split. Percy hit the stairs 2 at a time, moving through bodies like he was a rumor. On the mezzanine, the east node blinked behind a decorative grate that had forgotten to be decorative. He ripped the grate, set the cage, repeated the trick with less grace and more speed. The siphon's net loosened another notch. Mira texted. "West done. Grid uncoupled. Det later." He'd make a joke about interest rates later. For now, he rode the building's breath back to the courtroom. The room looked like after. People stood who had been sitting. People sat who had decided not to pass out on pride. The clerk cried and kept stamping dates anyway because muscle memory is a kind of survival. Hermes had his loafers off and was rubbing his arches like a man who remembered bare feet. Athena had not moved, but her attention had. Halvorson stood, jacket unbuttoned, hands open, posture immaculate. "We will investigate the splinter." "No," Mira said. It wasn't loud. It beat the room like a gavel. Halvorson's eyebrows lifted 1 millimeter. "Pardon, you don't get to investigate what you installed," she said. "We do it with oversight that cannot be bribed by your budget." "Allegations," he said. "Observations," she said. "I was in the room when your anonymous directive hit our board, Director. The router name wasn't ours. It wasn't municipal. It belonged to a network that pings off a temple roof." Athena's gaze cut to the gods, sighed like a thrown knife. Hermes had the decency to look mildly ashamed for somebody else. The river deity stopped scrolling his light phone. The shinobi envoy folded her hands. "Until this is resolved, we can't talk about leashes. We talk about shelters and about who we ask to stand guard." "Your villages," Halvorson said. He meant, "your ghosts. Your old ways. Our people," she corrected. "And the people here who remember how to move a body out of a building without turning it into PR." Athena considered Percy as if recalculating. "The seal is tabled," she said. "For now. Burn it," Percy said. "Don't push it," Mira murmured, without looking at him. He looked around at a room that had just had its blood PR. Escher spiked by a machine built on purpose. He felt the city breathing outside. Rain slowed, traffic trying to pretend it had never paused. He felt the mark quiet and patient in the worst possible way, like a wave in a flat sea. An Aegis captain blocked the aisle with a polite body. "We'll need you to remain available," he said to Percy, tone saying, "Please sit nicely while we turn your life into a filing system." Percy didn't slow. "I'll be available to outcomes," he said. "Don't be cute," the captain said. "There's custody to discuss." "No," Percy said, and kept walking. "Stop," Halvorsen said. He didn't raise his voice. The word carried anyway, like a hand on the shoulder you don't want. Percy stopped because he chose to, not because he had to. He turned enough to let the room hear him and not enough to invite applause. "I'm not a leash," he said. "I'm not your PR problem. I'm not your solution with a serial number. I move people out of burning rooms. That's it. You want me to sit in a box because your machines can't help starting fights. That's your panic talking." He set his hand on the back of the bench. The wood was warm from bodies. "I don't belong to your panic." He walked. A guard stepped half in front of him. Kai was suddenly behind the guard without moving, hand light on the man's shoulder. "He's leaving," Kai said, calm. The man looked at him and made a decision he could live with. He stepped aside. Mira didn't stop Percy. She didn't cheer either. She texted something without looking at the screen. He felt his pocket buzz and didn't check it. The mess. Age would be a location later and a joke now. He didn't have hands for both. He pushed the heavy courthouse door open on rain-wet hinges and stepped into air that hadn't been processed by anyone's machine. The city smelled like wet stone and pretzels that had been reheated too many times. He took a breath that made his ribs sore and went down the steps 2 at a time. Naruto leaned against a lamppost at the bottom, hoodie up. Grinned like a man who'd watched an entire fight from the wrong angle and still liked the winner. "You talk pretty when you're not trying to," he said. "I stole it from a god," Percy said. "Good," Naruto said. He handed over a paper bag that leaked steam. "Eat." Percy opened it and found dumplings that had sweated themselves into a perfect collapse. He ate 2 walking, 1 while dodging a stroller, and a 4th when a pigeon tried to negotiate. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a person with a job he wasn't done with. On the courthouse steps behind him, C. Amaris found Halvorsen's face in Athena's profile and made statements into content. Inside, under the skylight, someone unscrewed a black tripod and put it into evidence in a bag that wouldn't hold what mattered. His phone buzzed twice. "Mira. You made enemies and helped everyone breathe anyway. Don't get used to that order. Also, you owe me a cage cleaning fee." He typed. "Send invoice. If it's more than $20, I'll argue." She replied. "It's always more than $20. He grinned and didn't realize he'd done it until Naruto elbowed him like a brother. They walked a block without talking. At the corner, Naruto pointed his chin toward the river. "It moved," he said. "I know," Percy said, and the mark under his skin twitched like a sleeper rolling over. "It's hungry and it learned a new route. It'll try us at the lighthouse. Or somewhere dumber with more phones. You'll get there," Naruto said. "We," Percy said, automatic. Naruto's silence was a hand on his shoulder that didn't grip. "You'll get there," he repeated. Softer. "I can't stand in the same room as your bell without making it ring." Percy hated how right that was. He also loved that Naruto said it out loud instead of writing him a plan. "I'll send pictures," he said, which was a promise with teeth. "Make them ugly," Naruto said. "Pretty means we failed to show the work." They split at a kiosk that sold umbrellas and life advice. Percy kept walking. The courthouse's dome peeked between buildings, less important by the step. His jacket stuck to his neck in a way he didn't bother fixing. His hands felt they remembered the shape of the cage and didn't want to forget. A text came in with no name and a tone he could identify without looking. "Your speeches improve," the message read. "Your hunger management is artless. Shall I assist?" He typed back, slow. "You can wait your turn like everybody else." A beat. Then. "I do not wait. I arrive." He turned the phone off. He threw the black key from his inner pocket to his outer. Like putting a problem somewhere he could keep an eye on it. He slipped into a subway entrance that smelled like victory and bleach. The train came. He didn't sit. He stood his hand looped through the strap and watched the station names swipe by. He wasn't contained. He wasn't safe. He wasn't alone either. That would have to be enough for the length of a city block and a little more. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Moonlit Sabotage. The seaside temple clung to the bluff like it had negotiated a lease with the wind. Lanterns bobbed along the path in cautious pairs. Tourists were gone. Devotees had left incense that still made the air taste like oranges and ash. The ocean below breathed in long, patient pulls, more black than blue in the moonlight. Percy crouched behind a low wall and watched the patrols rhythm through slats of salt-warped wood. 2 guards, one heavy on his heels, the other light and bored. The bored one checked his phone at the same point ACH lap and paused 3 beats because the signal hated this coastline. Percy counted it twice to be sure. He could have moved after 1. He liked knowing the tempo before he danced. Mira slid in beside him, breath even from the climb. She had darkened her jacket with something cheap and matte and tied her hair into a knot that made her look like she planned to solve a problem and get fries after. The small case from the roof sat flat in her pack. A coil of wire peeked from the zipper like a tongue. Pattern, she asked. 3-beat phone fail, Percy said. 4 if he forgets how irritation works. Southgate, she said. Lazier than it wants to be, he said, and tapped his chest twice to set his own heartbeat to the temples. The mark under his collarbone took that as invitation and pressed forward like a rude guest. He shoved it back without making a show. We use the east steps. The wind's loud enough there to hide our feet. Kai's voice came soft from the slope above them. Or we can walk through the front and tell them truth like it's a sword. That's your job, Mira said. Duel a statue if it heckles us. Kai's mouth did the ghost of a smile. He wore a rain black jacket over a shirt he wouldn't need because he never felt the cold the way other people did. His sword stayed hidden, his posture didn't. Evan huddled in the shadow of a shrine bell, hood up, hands tucked into his sweatshirt like they were smuggling nerves. He had slept badly. He hid it by counting steps out loud in his head. The kid was too smart not to be here and too young to be responsible for how smart he was. Percy hadn't invited him. Mira had insisted. He sees patterns we don't, she'd said. Also he refuses to stay home. You're rear, Percy told him now. You vanish if I say vanish. You don't argue. Evan looked offended and then caught himself. I don't argue, he said, and then couldn't help adding, I advise. Advisors who don't vanish don't get to advise again, Mira said without turning. Evan shut his mouth and nodded, eyes flashing in ways that made Percy think of teenage hurricanes. They moved. The temple had been built to keep you honest. Steps too shallow to run. Corners designed to make you bow to the wind without realizing it. Percy slid his palm along a balustrade as they climbed, feeling the grain of wood that had memorized 1,000 hands. He listed Ned for the places where the ocean crawled under stone and left behind just enough water to make a veil if he asked it kindly. At the east gate, a carved dog with half a face guarded a chain and a CGN that politely said closed for restoration. Percy dropped to a knee, breathed into the chain until the links sweated, and rolled his thumb across the lock. The tumblers shivered, then stopped pretending. Company, he whispered, and set a thin veil across the opening. From 3 steps away it looked like air. From inside it felt like quiet. They slipped through. The courtyard opened like a mouth. Paper prayers fluttered on cords. Hundreds of small wishes turning the night into a whisper. Mira touched one lightly as they passed and the paper settled, as if deciding to stay out of their way. Shrine storehouse, she murmured, pointing with her chin at a low building with a ridiculous amount of new security for something labeled with calligraphy that translated roughly to expensive old junk. Hollow fruit shard is in there if the informant is worth the coffee I paid for him. He liked the coffee, Kai said. You judged a lead by his latte, Percy said. I judge everything by everything, Mira said. They slid along the storehouse wall until they hit the service door. It had a lock that wanted to be touched by a specific hand and a keypad that wanted to blink at you until you explained your whole life. Percy didn't have either. He had humidity. He set his fingers on the seam where door met frame and coaxed the night air to gather. A thin film formed, dense as a held breath. He pressed. The metal flexed. The latch complained. He pushed more. The mark under his skin leaned forward like a drunk at a bar. He didn't let it steer. The latch popped with a small offended click. Analog rules, Mira said. She slid past him and put a wedge under the door to keep it from lying to them later. Inside smelled like cedar and thyme. Shelves held boxes that had never wanted to be opened and instruments that only sang for dead hands. A camera sat in the corner with a wide, judgmental eye. Mira lifted a hand and clicked her tongue twice. The lens fogged. Evan, behind them, could not hide how impressed he was. Old ritual box in the back, Mira said. Should be empty. Won't be. Percy followed her down the narrow aisle, running his fingertips over a row of bells that wanted ringing. The black key in his pocket vibrated once as if recognizing a cousin in the room and deciding to be shy about it. He didn't touch it. They found the box. It was black lacquered, inlaid with a design that made Percy's eyes hurt if he followed the lines too long. Mira slid 2 picks into the tiny ornamental lock and paused, listening to the way metal learned to be door. She twisted once, twice. The lid shifted. Then the building breathed wrong. Not the wind, not the ocean. A breath that belonged to a machine remembering it had meaning. Time, Kai said, voice flat, eyes angling toward the courtyard. Mira lifted the lid. The shard sat on a cushion, the color of deep sap and starlight, a slice of something that had once been part of a fruit humans shouldn't bite. It pulsed like a heartbeat had been taught calculus. Put it back, Percy said, because the urge to take it made his teeth itch. We can't leave it for them, Mira said. Define them, Kai said. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned a fraction toward the door. Evan, who had been pretending not to exist, blurted, Aegis Van. 2. North Path. Dampeners. And, Percy said. And something else, Evan said. He swallowed. Feels like the color of migraines. Perfect, Mira said, dry. She reached for the shard with 2 fingers like a lab tech asking to see a throat. The storehouse door banged. Pen and 2 men in Aegis blues filled it with their shoulders and their mistake. One had a stun baton that crackled with borrowed lightning. The other had a non-lethal shotgun that had made itself feel important by being ugly. Step back, the shotgun said. Hi, Percy said. He spun a veil across the aisle and raised a palm. Consider not. The baton guy lunged. He didn't mean to. Mira had ped his ankle in a wire so soft you couldn't see it until it bit. He went down hard on temple floorboards that had watched better men pray. The shotgun snapped off a beanbag round that Percy split with 2 fingers and a water edge. The bag slapped wetly into an expensive drum on the shelf and the drum made a sound like disappointment. Kai laid the first guy out with the kindest elbow Percy had ever seen. Evan froze for one breath too long. The second guard saw the kid and recalculated, and Percy hated watching a man choose the wrong leverage, every time. Don't, Percy said, and had to move faster than a habit. He slid, caught the shotgun hand, bent it just to the edge where fingers decide they like holding a weapon less, and let the barrel point at the floor. The man did the predictable thing. He tried to knee Percy. Which meant he forgot his center. Percy shook him off his own feet, guided him to the wall, and pinned his shoulder with a palm that wasn't violent and wasn't friendly. You don't want to do this, he said. Go home. Call your mother, say you like her. The second guard breathed like a man who didn't call his mother. He snarled something about custody and jurisdiction. On and then went on pure muscle memory for a jab that had once worked on a drunk at a bar. Percy sighed and let the man land one to the chest to remove that option from his menu. It hurt. Percy let it. Then he pushed the man out of himself the way a wave pushes a swimmer who's forgotten how to float. The guard found the floor and a nap. Evan, Mira said, taut, door. The kid moved. He yanked the wedge. He slid the door in and locked it in a way that would make the next set of boots waste precious seconds. He turned back, face paler than theory. We're blown, Kai said. Decision time. Mira had already made hers. She lifted the shard in its cushion with a disdain that told it was not her friend and slid it into a padded sleeve. The sleeve hissed, hungry. The shard went quiet like it had just remembered manners. We move, she said. They hit the east steps and were immediately met by a different problem. Not Aegis. Percy would have preferred Aegis. Something dropped from the roofline and landed with a sound like lacquer cracking. It stood too straight to be human and wore a mask the color of old blood polished to respectability. The face painted on the mask was a smile that had never learned why you smile. A cloak hung from narrow shoulders, tapping the stones like a heartbeat when the wind caught it. Kai stopped dead. Proxy, he said. He didn't sheath or draw. He flexed his right hand and found lightning there, as if by accident. Isari's voice arrived through the mask. It wasn't big. It was hungry and amused in the way a starving man can be when he's looking at a bakery window he has keys to. Little vessel, it said, friendliness wrapped in rot. You brought friends. Percy took one lateral step to open a line for Mira and Evan. Not friends, he said. Family. And a guy with a sword. The mask cocked its head. Ah, it said. The thunder dog. Kai didn't afford it a reply. He stepped into range and cut to test. The blade met the cloak and the claw. Axe slipped aside like water that had decided to be silk for a minute. The mask didn't move. The proxy didn't make a second mistake. There hadn't been a first. It simply learned the lesson of Kai's reach and then stepped into Percy's. It didn't go for his chest. It slashed for his knee, at a human angle meant to make men fall. Percy took the cut on a water edge that had barely been finished being thought. It rang like glass. He tumbled back once, twice, used the handrail to keep from dropping 3 steps to a stone that would not forgive his skull. Evan, Mira snapped. Back path. Now. The kid bolted. 2 Aegis operators materialized from the shadow-like efficiency. They weren't Halvorson's favorites. They were people who had decided to be useful to the wrong outcome. One grabbed Evan by the backpack strap. Another reached for his shoulder. Evan twisted like a cat and nearly got out. Nearly. Mira swore. A single clean syllable. Kai moved to intercept and the proxy slid between him and the operators like a polite assassin. Percy cut low, trying to shift it. It took the hit on the cloak and felt nothing about it at all. Pick, the mask said, cheerful as a butcher. Shard. Boy. Percy's jaw locked. Choices like that were traps even when you chose. He didn't step toward the proxy. He stepped toward Evan because the math he could live with started at whoever was youngest. He flicked his fingers and the temple's cisterns remembered they were full. Water came up through the cracks in ancient stone and through the throat of the old dragon-carved spout and across worn steps. It rolled out in a sheet so thin that moonlight turned it into a mirror. Operators lost their footing with the indignation of men betrayed by physics. Evan tore free and ran with his head down like a good student who hated hallways. Go, Percy barked. Go with him. Mira shoved the shard sleeve into her pack, yanked a charge from the case that had been born to be something else, slapped it against a junction box, and made the temple's security grid forget its manners. Lights went out. Alarms tried to become opera and remembered at the last second they were flutes. The proxy didn't care about the dark. It watched Percy through the mask with attention that felt like being counted. It stepped back as if inviting him to try again. Percy didn't oblige. He didn't chase power. He put his bod why where it would matter and kept Evan between him and exits that had been designed to confuse. Kai feinted left and then hit right and the proxy blocked both at once as if turn-based combat had decided to grant itself extra actions. He adjusted. He stopped swinging for impressive cuts and started looking for small disasters, ankles to catch, elbows to fish. The proxy adjusted too. It learned and kept learning like the worst student in the world with infinite appetite and no ethics. Outside, Mira said, hauling a stunned operator by his collar and dumping him respectfully so his windpipe would keep being an option. We can't get surrounded in here. They broke into the courtyard. Lanterns threw long light that made friends out of corners and strangers out of friends. The wind off the sea pushed smoke from incense bowls and the smell bent memory toward funerals. Aegis vans blocked the north path, their headlights lying about daylight. The south path dropped fast into sea boulders and bad decisions. Boat, Percy said, pointing below the cliff. There. You don't have a boat, Kai said. I'll borrow one, Percy said. He didn't aim for the stone steps. He aimed for the low, scrub-torn path at the cliff's edge. The path you use when you work here and you smoke where your supervisor can't see. He took it 2 at a time and hoped the maintenance habits of bored humans would be true when gods breathed on a building. They were. The path spilled him onto a concrete shelf slick with sea and vows. Ropes. A skiff bobbing, scuffed. A motor so old it had given up on being proud and settled for starting. Evan, Percy said, pointing. In. I don't get boats, Evan said, honest. You get out, Percy said. He shoved the skiff off with a heel. Mira jumped in and steadied the bow with one hand while grabbing Evan's hoodie with the other. Kai stood between them and the steps and did the kind of work that looks dramatic if you don't know how precise you have to be to not take a head off by accident. The proxy dropped from the steps like a shadow with bones. It landed on the shelf so lightly the water didn't know it had company. It didn't lunge for the skiff. It slid. Stepped Percy's first cut and then spoke around him. Hungry, it said, admiring. So close to surrendering taste for speed. Percy didn't look at the mask. He looked at where its shoulders shifted before it moved. He feinted high with a half-formed Rasen blade that would have bitten if he'd let it, and instead splashed its collapse up into the eye holes of the mask. Water went into the vents that fed voice into the world. For a second, the proxy made the strangest sound, a wet hiss like a crowd shivering, and then nothing. It shook its head as if not accustomed to being inconvenienced. Mira got the motor to cough. She didn't ask how. She didn't tell the boat it owed her. It started because there wasn't time to be anything else. Two operators slid down the steps and learned gravity the hard way. One landed on his side and stayed down, reconsidering career paths. The other hit and rolled and came up aiming a taser at Percy's spine. Kai's scabbard tapped the man's wrist just hard enough to teach a lesson without breaking it. The taser arced into the sea and spat drama. On. Mira snapped. Percy grabbed the gunnel and threw himself in. Kai took a step back toward the proxy, guard up, and then stepped onto the boat like it was an insult to his balance to pretend wobble. The skiff nosed out into the swells. The motor made a noise like an old man sighing into a pillow. They cut a slow arc under the temple's cliff. The proxy watched them like time belonged to it. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. It stepped to the edge of the shelf and tilted its head and Percy felt a tug, not on the boat, on his blood. The mark rose like a fish to bait and said yes without words. No, Percy told it. Not for you. The mask smiled the way paint smiles when it dry cracks. Soon, it said, voice tinny where water had found the seams. Then the proxy bent without bending, like a picture shifting on a wall, and leapt up the steps with disgusting grace. Is it leaving? Evan asked, trying to keep panic from being something his throat could make worse. Mira said, eyes on the cliff. It's going ahead. They didn't have far to go and it felt like a mile. The skiff jolted against a swell and then settled into a chop that made talking a hobby. Mira steered with small, brutal motions. Percy kept a hand in the water to tell it what he needed. The boat obeyed because disobeying would have been embarrassing. The breakwater ahead hit a narrow channel. They slid into it like a rumor. The lighthouse stood up from the end of the spit, paint flayed by weather, glass halo going dim as the lens rotated. A foghorn slept. The sky was a lighter shade of black. City glow on the horizon made everything look like it had already happened at least once. Stop, Kai said, hand up. Mira throttled down. The engine cut to a grumpy idle. On the rocks above the channel, something moved with human shape and wrong decisions. It wore the same lacquer mask. It wasn't the same proxy. It was another body with the same appetite, chained to the same voice. It held the shard sleeve Percy had just watched Mira tuck into her pack. What? Percy said, throat dry. Mira's hand flew to her zipper. The sleeve sat inside. Zipper closed. Her fingers touched air. It didn't take it, she said, disgusted. I handed it the trick where I breathe and it wrote its name on the zipper pull-in. My fingers forgot how to feel the difference. She swore with precision. It learned something from the cube. Maybe from the key. It baited us with your choice, Kai said, then rewrote your hand. The proxy flicked 2 fingers and the shard sleeve flipped, graceful as a magic trick, and then ripped. The shard fell into its palm with the sound of a dropped tear. The lacquer turned its face toward them and tilted it as if sniffing. Thank you, it said. Percy's jaw worked and he didn't say the words his mouth wanted. He slid off the gunnel. Percy, Mira said, warning in the shape of his name. He sank to his knees in the boat and put both hands into the channel. The tide grabbed his wrists. He grabbed back. He thought about the tunnel and the chalk and the veil and the way a seal is a promise you make with the shape of your breath. He stretched a line from the lighthouse's base to the far rock wall, thin as fishing line, sharp as a paper cut. He set a second line at a cross, then a third, then a fourth, small. Invisible, petty geometry the proxy didn't respect because it didn't feel big. Now, he said, and the tide he'd pointed took a seat and pulled. The proxy hopped the first line without noticing it. The second checked its foot. The third slid across its shin. The fourth kissed its ankle and cut the way only water held meanly can. The proxy stumbled. It didn't fall. It didn't do anything that would make Percy feel like he'd won a real thing. It simply misstepped long enough for the shard to tumble out of its palm and hit the rock. Kai was already moving. He stepped out of the boat like the sea had leased him a square meter of floor. He used the mistake to get within reach. He didn't try to cut the mask. He cut the wrist. Lightning popped. The blade hissed against something that wasn't bone and then was. The proxy's hand jerked. The shard skittered. Percy raised a wave the size of a table and slapped it sideways. The shard slid toward a crack. The proxy lunged. Mira gunned the engine and rammed the skiff into the rock with the exact amount of force required to make Providence owe her. Percy jumped and landed half on, half off the ledge. His palm slapped the shard. It burned. Not heat. Hunger. It recognized the mark under his skin and sang. He shoved it into the crack and shoved a seal behind it like a cork. The lighthouse beam rolled overhead, a lazy eye. For a second, the lines Percy had stretched from base to wall picked up the light and made a crude net. It looked accidental. He made it purpose. Get back, Mira yelled. He did not. He held. The proxy stepped through the net like a man steps into a rumor, carefully and without belief. The lines bit again. Not enough. The lacquer lifted its hand. A second voice joined the first, further away and louder. Like the ocean talking through a megaphone. The lines trembled, jealous of how strong they wanted to be. Kai used the greedy second to yank Percy backward by the hood. The Oxy slammed a palm where Percy's shoulder had been. Rock dust puffed with all the drama of regret. Boat, Kai said, annoyed with both of them. Percy rolled into the skiff, ribs reminding him they were people. Mira swung the bow out. The prop screamed and stopped. Something had wrapped the shaft. The boat drifted sideways toward a tooth of rock that wanted to turn them into a metaphor. Cut, she asked. Short. Hold, Percy said. He closed his eyes and let the part of his brain he never lends to anyone count. 1 breath. 2. The mark in his chest rolled its eyes at the moon and showed high. Hands that weren't his doing icing on a cake that wasn't cake, and he told it to go narrate inside a jar. It laughed, mean. He kept counting. On 6, the lighthouse beam hit exactly the line he'd RKED in his head when they slid under the cliff. He threw the veil across the channel and it caught the light and pretended to be a different current for one priceless blink. The boat slipped sideways, out from under the rock tooth, into water that agreed to be kinder. Go, he said, voice low. Mira pulled the starter like she was punishing it for being old. The engine coughed, thought about dying, then misbehaved into life. They rolled out through the break in the rocks and into open water. The proxy watched from the ledge. It didn't pursue. It held the position of a chess piece that knows it's already taken yours. Aegis vans flared their lights on the cliff. A chopper nose came over the ridge and then decided the night was too busy to be blamed for anything and banked away. Oh, smart, Mira said, bitter, breathing hard. We walked into a mutual trap and adopted it. We kept the kid, Kai said, stating the math he preferred. We lost the shard, Mira said. Not to them, Percy said, nodding toward the proxy. To it. Evan sat with his chin on his knees and stared at the water like it owed him a clear explanation. I messed up, he said. I froze. You moved when told, Percy said. That's skill. You'll argue later about the part where you didn't like it. Mira glanced back at the cliff. The mask didn't move. The wind took a long breath. Next, she said, but not as a question. Percy's phone buzzed in his pocket with the weight of somebody else's urgency. He glanced. A message from a number he hadn't saved because saving it felt like asking for pain. The text was 6 words and a truth with teeth. North Shoal. Tonight. No backup. Mira saw his face change and didn't flinch. "Your bell," she said. "Mine," Percy said. He closed his eyes for 1 second and let the exhaustion of almost. The shard almost secure, the boat almost wrecked, the proxy almost stalled, depart and leave behind only what needed doing. When he opened them, the city's glow had shifted a shade toward blue. The lighthouse turned and turned, indifferent. "We're not ready," Evan said. "We never are," Kai said. Percy reached for Myra's hand without thinking. She met him there without being asked. The squeeze was quick and undeniable, an agreement to be alive at the same time on purpose. "Then we go anyway," Percy said. The skiff angled north. The shoals waited where the sound changed. The night made room for whatever they were about to do by pretending it had always been that shape. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whirlpool Summit. The shoals didn't look like much, just a ring of black teeth gnawing the surface where the coast shrugged out to sea. The sound changed there. Buoys clonked a beat that made the ribs think. Gulls sat on the water like gamblers who'd learned to fold. Percy cut the skiff's engine 100 meters out. Nothing carried sound like a quiet ocean. He felt the tide's mood in his wrists and answered it with a small touch, the same way you make a straw. Why dog trust your hand before you ask it to heal? Naruto stood at the bow in a hoodie and an expression that treated the night like a teammate. "You bring friends?" he asked. "They're making sure we still have a shoreline to come back to," Percy said. He didn't look toward the harbor lights, but he felt the lattice of texts and trust Mira had spun along piers and breakwaters, volunteer crews staged at firehouses. Grid cutouts mapped in pencil, analog radios chattering in short, unheroic sentences. Somewhere up coast, Kai had planted himself on a lighthouse balcony and told a storm to mind its manners. "Good," Naruto said. He dropped into a crouch and palmed the water, eyes half-lidded. "You feel that? A hum under the skin." "Wrong note." "Yeah. Don't wait for it to knock," Naruto said, straightening. "If you let a wave choose, it chooses the cliff." Percy hopped to the shoal stone, boots slipping, then holding. He breathed in the damp rot of kelp and old rope. The ring of rocks formed a stadium with no seats, only edges. The current circled in lazy spirals like a cat about to remember it's a cat. The mark warmed under his collarbone, a slow roll as if it were stretching after a nap. He told it to stay seated. It smiled in geometry and showed him the idea of teeth. Naruto joined him. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a half ring of water in front of them and the kind of dark behind them that makes you honest. Naruto didn't make speeches. He cracked his neck with a small pop. "On your call, kid." Percy lifted his hands. He didn't summon a wall. He asked for a slope. Tide stacked itself higher between the shoals, a wide bowl whose edges were rock and whose bottom wanted to be a whirl if somebody told it a story it liked. He traced the story with the scars on his knuckles. The bowl turned, first slow, then with intent. Water found the groove it had been told to ignore. A spiral formed the way dancers form a circle when no one says the word. The center drew down. The edges rose. He kept the pitch low. Too much and the bowl would slop, flood the shoals and drown their footing. He needed a seal, not a tantrum. Naruto whistled, impressed. "You learned to be mean without being loud. Your advice was free," Percy said. "Don't expect a refund." The air thinned. Not cold. Thinner like a promise kept too long in a drawer. The surface beyond the shoals bulged. A sphere lifted, perfectly wrong. A globe of ocean pressed into shape by a hand that didn't like pressure but loved control. It rolled toward the ring with no wake. When it touched the current Percy had set, the sphere didn't slosh. It slid into the rhythm like something that had been waiting to be invited. The sphere peeled apart. Water poured away in sheets to reveal a body grown from hunger and memory and mathematics. Tall, not giant. Slim, not weak. Skin a white that had seen stars from the outside. Eyes like bruises, not in color but in the way they built themselves, layer on layer of attention. No mouth, only a seam that opened when it needed to. The lacquer mask had been an imitation of this, a child's drawing of a storm. Isari stepped onto the nearest shoal and didn't slip. The sea found purchase for him where there was none. "Little vessel," he said, the seam moving without sound. The voice landed everywhere at once. The water, the air, the bones. "Tourist season's over," Percy said. He kept the whirl moving. kept its pull just shy of violence. Naruto rolled his shoulder, flexed fingers. Last call, he said to Isari, easy. You leave the city alone, you crawl back into whatever jar I break. Or we make you regret having a name. Isari turned his head with the fascination of a child discovering an echo. Bell Tower, he said, tasting Naruto like an old wound. Percy felt the tug. The mark didn't lift his hand. It leaned into the tug as if the body were a machine with settings. Naruto glanced, caught the micro-flinch Percy tried to swallow, and reached across Percy's chest without looking. He tapped 2 fingers to Percy's forehead the way a teacher taps a student's notebook when the answer's there if he stops panicking. Then he did what only Family G.E.T.s away with. He headbutted Percy lightly, a bump of skull against skull that could have been a joke and wasn't. Choose, Naruto said. The tug relented a hair. Percy laughed once, sharp. I hate you. Correct, Naruto said. Isari watched the touch like you watch an animal you intend to eat teach a trick to another animal you intend to eat later. He stepped forward. The whirl tugged at his ankles like a toddler. He ignored it. Hungry? Percy asked. I measure, Isari said. The seam bent pleasant. I weight the city by its fear. You feed me enough to be amusing and then you starve me enough to make me clever. You say that like we should be proud. Naruto spread his stance, a small, unshowy thing that turned his center into a place where stupid decisions went to die. You picked the wrong ocean, friend. Friend, Isari repeated, as if sampling a texture. Percy didn't wait for the lesson. He moved. He hopped the gap to the next rock and threw a blade he'd been spinning in his palm. Not at Isari's head but at the water under his feet. The blade pierced. The whirl grabbed the wound and widened it. The surface dipped. Isari's balance shifted exactly the amount a dance. R allows for a bad partner and nothing more. Naruto was already there. Steel in one hand, chakra in the other, he braided a Rasenshuriken through fingers that had memorized hundreds of fights and their prices. But he didn't throw a wind saw. He threaded Percy's current into it, wetting the edges, making it a spiral tide that roared when it wanted to really scream. He stepped, turned, and sent it low. It shredded 3 meters of water and then tore into Isari's knee like a promise kept. Isari stumbled, then didn't. The seam bent into a smile. He put a hand to the wound and came away with nothing on his pale palm. The water did the bleeding for him. Percy tightened the whirl. The bowl steepened. The center pulled hard enough that his shoulders started to ache. He pictured the ring of shoals not as rocks but as anchors. Each one a knot in a fisherman's net. He pictured the lighthouse beam, a slow white blink, crossing the lines he was throwing. The light could be a stitch if he placed it. Naruto, he said, breath thin. Give me 3 anchors at 12, 3, and 7. Naruto didn't ask for definitions. He cut air 3 times with his free hand, chakra marks that lit the fog F. Or a heartbeat and set in the dark like rivets. Percy tied currents to them. The whirl deepened, wider now, the center a mouth. Isari stepped to the very lip of it like he wanted to look down. You build graves and call them seals. We build exits you don't get to use, Percy said, and jumped. He didn't jump at Isari. He jumped past him, deeper into the ring, boot soles slapping the slick stone. Knee almost going on a bad angle and corrected by the lightest touch of water underfoot. The whirl looked like a terrible idea from up close. It wanted to take everything into its throat and keep it there until regret learned to float. He let it take him. Not all of him. He set his body at the edge of the pull, feet wide, hands out, and leaned into the spiral the way you lean into a sharp T. Earn on a bike when stopping would get you flattened. The mark thrummed greed at the speed. He refused to feed it. He fed the water. Naruto landed opposite him, mirrored, breath sinking without choreography. The ring hummed. Light from the lighthouse slid across the chop, hit the lines Percy kept making, and scattered in a pattern his gut recognized as right. He set the last piece. A crosscurrent at the base, shallow as a hair. The whirl spun with intent. The mouth closed around what it had been told to hold. Isari snapped his fingers. It wasn't flashy. The sound was small and cruel. The shish, OAL to Percy's right dropped 1/2 meter, then rose. The water hiccuped as if someone had pressed rewind on a wave's birth and then unpaused with a new midwife. The whirl bucked. The anchors Naruto H. Ad cut held with a complaining whine Percy felt in his molars. You see the frame, Isari said, admiring. You do not see where it hangs. Percy did the stupid thing. He smiled. Then show me. Isari stepped into the spiral. He didn't slip. He didn't fight the pull. He let it take him 2 paces toward the mouth, then turned the way a dancer turns a partner's weight and used Percy's own current to come uphill with more than limbs. He reached Percy without moving fast. He reached Percy like a tide reaches ankles. Naruto met him with a palm heel and the kind of punch you throw when you dawn. You want to hurt a face as much as you want to teach a neck to reconsider posture. Isari took it. He shouldn't have been able to. The seam smiled wider. Naruto's knuckles stung. Percy wasn't in a position to admire technique. The mark leapt at the pressure like a dog sensing the door handle. It tried to thread itself into his shoulder muscles and rewrite timing, half step sooner, angle a degree toward something that bled differently. Breath a beat held too long. It offered speed. It offered certainty. It showed a picture of Isari's head in his hand, which was so stupid Percy almost laughed in the middle of trying not to drown. He closed his eyes for one half blink and remembered the chalk circle in the tunnel and the water that had only stayed because he'd been company, not guard. He opened his eyes and said, softly enough that only the mark heard, not your body. Not your name. Isari heard anyway. He let his head tilt the tiniest bit as if a new note had joined the song and he liked it less. Naruto slid beside Percy without squeezing the space he needed, not crowding, presence a line at his back. Give it room to scream, he said. Let it. Then decide. Decide what? How loud your no needs to be. Percy laughed, breathless. Naruto, of course, had turned refusing a god into a breath exercise. Isari lunged. He didn't telegraph. He didn't reach with arms. The water itself punched, a square meter of it stiffening into a slab that came for Percy's chest. Percy tried to sidestep and discovered Isari had made the next current over sticky as honey. Naruto threw a seal with a flex of ring finger and thumb. The slab hit it and folded into a waterfall that slapped Percy across the shoulders instead of breaking his ribs. Thanks, Percy said. You're buying ramen forever, Naruto said. The fight changed texture. It wasn't trading cuts. It was placement. Isari used the spiral Percy had made like a drawstring, tugging everything a notch tighter every exchange. Squeezing until feet couldn't quite find where they'd been trained to land. He tried to ride Percy's habit of saving people toward choices that saved fast and badly. Twice Naruto took a hit that had Percy's name on it because he'd seen his son's shoulders go a degree too eager. Stop playing hero alone, Naruto said, jaw tight. Then stop blocking with your face, Percy snapped. Fair. The lighthouse beam rolled. Percy took the blink and threw a new line, not on the water but through it, an axis, something for the spiral to respect. Isari bled a half step of grace for it. That was enough. Naruto shifted a meter and cut a crosswind into the mouth of the whirl, a micro-vortex making the bigger one cough. Isari's footing, which had been unfooting, met a lie and believed it for a single, generous heartbeat. Percy slammed his palm down. The spiral dropped. The center gulped. Isari sank to the knee in a circle that decided to be a throat. The seam smiled again, teeth he didn't have gleaming anyway. He reached. Not with arms. With the mark. It wasn't subtle. It didn't have to be. Percy felt the latch in his chest flip the way a door flips from lock to open when you forget which way you turned it last night. Everything doubled. He saw the shoals. He saw them from above. He saw the city with power lines lit like veins, the river striped like a muscle, the lighthouse beam a slow heartbeat. The chopper path from the temple to the harbor like a finger dragging in dust. He saw the rumor of himself, a pattern etched into attention like chalk on asphalt, and he saw exactly where to push to erase it and rewrite the line that would make the whirl a crown. He wanted to do it. The certainty felt like a warm room in winter. He could be clean. He could be right. All the indecision that had kept him alive could go on break and he could let the thing that knew how to hunt move his knees, elbows, thoughts. Naruto didn't argue with a speech. He put his hand on Percy's jaw and pressed their foreheads together like an idiot and said, "We don't do perfect." The doubled vision stuttered. Percy's breath snagged. He tasted ramen steam from a kitchen that hadn't learned to clean the floor. He smelled oil on Naruto's hoodie and damp from a tunnel no one else remembered. The mark snarled. Isari's seam grew thin. Choose, Naruto said again. He headbutted Percy a little harder. Hey, choose me. Percy had chosen before he could pretend he needed to think. He laughed through his teeth and opened his palm to the ocean. He didn't try to jam the surge back into himself. He didn't try to make the whirl small enough to hold with clean fingers. He gave it away. The power that had run up his bones like a thief looking for silver met salt and went out into miles of black. The whirl inhaled like a giant being born. The line he'd set to the lighthouse hooked the beam and stitched the edges together with light and current and promise. The anchors Naruto had cut flared blue, then white. The seal wasn't a lid. It was a routing, not a prison but a river that said this way, and everything that tried to argue found itself agreeing. Isari felt the choice. He turned his head slowly toward Percy, not surprised. Exactly. Something more interesting, like a hunter admiring a prey animal that had undone a trap with hooves. Wasteful, he said. Generous, Naruto corrected. The whirl held. Isari went under to the waist and put a hand on the spiral like a man on a railing. The spiral indented. The hand didn't sink. It shouldn't have been possible. That was the point. He leaned on the impossible until it squeaked. Myra's voice buzzed Percy's pocket on a channel that had never liked him. We've got grid flutter, she said, no preamble. City's lights are thinking about blinking. If you keep that thing exactly where you're keeping it, I can funnel surge into public works instead of frying half the borough. If you drop it, the burst, don't drop it. Not dropping, Percy said. Also you're insane, she said fondly. Kai says he can see the shoals from here. He just rolled his eyes at your technique. I'm going to make him say thank you later. Tell him I said he owes me a sandwich, Percy said. Because humans were good tether. Isari tore the railing he'd made a centimeter and smiled like it was a joke only he liked. You give away what makes you different. Wrong ocean, Percy said. Everything different makes the tide. Isari looked bored. It was new. He reached behind his back as if scratching and pulled. He didn't pull a blade. He pulled a line, a thread of dark that looked like someone had drawn a straight road between 2 points with a pencil that had never learned to be dull. The line hummed the way routers hum when you pretend your house is the whole world. It arced inland. Stop, Naruto said, very flat. Isari didn't. He flicked the line. It latched to something Percy couldn't see, something in the city's bright veins. The world didn't slow. The line didn't care. It was the wrong kind of power. Attention turned into a pipeline. Isari meant to leave his body here in the choke and send his hunger like a wire under a door, into the grid. Into cameras and emergency alerts in every pocket that vibrated with need. Percy swore. He's going around us. Naruto looked north, eyes narrowing as if he could see the slither on power lines. He eats belief. Cameras are the new prayers. Then cut the liturgy, Percy said, half a joke, whole idea. He reached for his pocket. The black key vibrated like an excited lie. He didn't touch it. He touched the lattice Mira had built in the city, the tiny analog map he carried in his head because he trusted paper more than anything tonight. He felt the stations, firehouses, clinics, mom and pop shops with generator plugs, subway nodes with emergency lights. He asked each for a favor. Electricity didn't love him the way water did. It humored him because he made it laugh sometimes. Mira understood what he was trying before he finished the thought. I can drop everything but hospitals and transit safety. You sure? No, Percy said. Do it. Done, she said, and he felt it. A slide in the city's glow like someone had turned art galleries into second suns and then turned them off. The line Isari had thrown brightened in irritation. It bent, seeking a better path, and found refrigerators and phones and the faith people plug into them. Percy slid a veil along those two. Not a block, just enough to turn gaping attention into static. Isari hissed. Not loud, not impressed. He tugged the line and found fewer throats to pour down. He adapted. He always adapted. He threw 3 smaller lines, each splitting at the end like a river's mouth. Greedy, Naruto said. He lifted a hand, fingers flying through a short kata that looked like it should open a door. It didn't. It closed options. The anchors he'd laid flared again and every line Isari flung hit the stitch points and kinked like a hose. Dad, Percy said. Yeah, thanks, Percy said, because short gratitude buys long seconds. Pay me in dumplings. Isari went quiet. The quiet wasn't patience. It was notice. Percy felt it the way you feel being looked at through a window. Isari had been fighting a seal and fencing with a father, and now he was curious. He tilted his face toward Percy in a way that said oh. He reached, not at arm's length, but inside. The mark bucked like a horse that wanted to throw the rider so it could run toward a field only it saw. Percy didn't brace. He did nothing the mark could use as a lever. He opened, not to Isari, to water, to the dumb, perfect taste of salt and dirt, to the weight of the spiral and the way the shoals had collected barnacles for generations without asking why. He breathed in dizzy, full, and let the mark be a scream inside a cathedral that refused to echo. Choose, Naruto said a third time, calm as a man choosing toppings. I did, Percy said, and meant it like a nail. He pushed, not into the mark, not against Isari, but through himself and into the spiral. The seal brightened, power leaving him in a flood that would have left him empty if he believed that's how people work. He didn't. He trusted refill. He trusted the city and the ocean and the stupid heartbeat that refused to play along with annihilation. Isari lost his smile. The seam went thin. He sank to the chest. The whirl grabbed both legs like two patient hands that loved the work and didn't gloat. Wasteful, Isari said again, less sure. Alive, Percy said. Isari changed tactics. He stopped pulling on belief and tugged on gravity. The spiral's throat lengthened. The bottom moved away like an elevator dropping with a cheerful ding. The anchors whined, final. The stitch points Naruto had cut blistered white. A crack shot through the nearest shoal rock like a plaque of lightning. The whirl shuddered toward too much. Myra's voice hit hot in Percy's ear. You're about to backdraft the harbor. On it, Naruto said. He threw seals, 5, fast, onto the air above the spiral, not on water at all. They hung like paper lanterns. Percy realized a bit later he'd seen them in stories and dismissed them as drawings. The seals didn't close anything. They redirected. The drop slowed to a manageable fall. Have you been holding out on me? Percy asked, breath sawed. Yes, Naruto said. Percy laughed, giddy and furious and so tired. He slid his palms together and made a shape. Not a blade, not a cage, a window. 2 planes of slick held a ship's width apart. He set it at the spiral's lip and aimed it east, toward a stretch of empty water where nothing would like to be angry tonight. The spiral belched pressure. The window took it. A geyser tore into the sky where nobody was. Bright as a firework and twice as rude. The whirl sighed, less murderous. Isari went under. Not all the way. A hand stayed above the surface, fingers flexing daintily like a pianist being told to stop. The line to the city brightened one last time. Isari fired himself along it. Not his body, his signal. He slipped. Don't. Naruto started. Let him. Percy finished, already moving. He couldn't stop a ghost riding fiber optics with a fist. He could starve it. He grabbed his phone, swiped to the stupid analog group chat Mira had built for exactly this, and typed with hands that shook. Kill non-critical mains. Hospitals on. Transit safe. Cameras off. Phones to airplane if you love me. Now. Mira didn't reply with words. The city dimmed 2 shades. A marina went dark. A block of condos lost their aura. The skyline looked suddenly honest, ugly and sweet. The line Isari had thrown sputtered. It crushed itself into thinner and thinner thread. Searching for anything that would feed back. Percy and Mira and 1,000 people who had decided not to panic let it find nothing. Isari's hand patted the surface once, almost polite. The seam bent. Not a smile, exactly, not a frown. A question you throw to next time. The hand sank. The whirl sealed like a mouth deciding it's done talking. The shoals groaned. The anchors Naruto had set dimmed to normal air. The lighthouse turned and turned, unbothered. The geyser Percy had windowed east fell back into black with a slap that would make fish tell stories. Silence. Not total. Waves. Wind. Percy's own pulse punching his palm where he'd pressed it against stone. Naruto's breath, small. Somewhere behind them, a boat motor coughed and settled, the volunteer crews realizing they could stop pretending they weren't terrified. Percy let his knees bend. He didn't collapse. He sat, because he liked choosing. The mark in his chest was quiet. Not kind. Not sulking, either. Quiet like a dog. He's exercised enough to stop destroying furniture. Naruto sank beside him, hoodie soaked, hair sticky with salt. He leaned his shoulder into Percy's without announcing it. Good choice, he said. You going to stop headbutting me now? Percy asked. No, Naruto said. It works. Jerk. Correct. Myra's voice came through, softer. We kept lights where we needed them. Grid didn't implode. I'm buying myself cake I can't afford. Buy too, Percy said. He swallowed and found saliva again. He'll try again. Not here. I'm watching downtown, she said. And the places that don't get news unless they burn. Kai's text chimed in a second later, punctuation earnest as ever. Lighthouse still standing. You owe me 2 sandwiches. I owe you 1 apology. Percy typed. Make them ugly. I'm tired of pretty. Naruto tipped his chin toward the city. You feel the echo. He got a toe in. Not a foot, not even a nail, but a toe. Yeah, Percy said. He'll crawl. Then we'll step, Naruto said. He turned his head, cheek bumping Percy's hair like when Percy had been shorter and Naruto had been pretending to check for a fever. You want to try to stand? In a minute, Percy said. They didn't talk, which felt like a better kind of saying. A light bobbed along the shoal path. A fisherwoman in a rain jacket that had seen 1,000 mornings leaned her lantern out, face lined with salt and laughter. You two finished turning the sea into soup. She called conversationally. I've got a line out and I'd like my fish to have less opinions. Sorry, Naruto said, straight-faced. We paid the ocean overtime. She snorted. Tell it to send me an invoice. She looked at Percy, half in shadow. Recognition flashed. The way a city learns the shape of a rumor before it knows your name. She didn't make it weird. She lifted the lantern a degree. You look like my nephew after a soccer final he didn't win and didn't lose. Come in. There's thermos tea. It tastes like rust and victory. Best flavor, Percy said. He stood, legs remembering land like a new language. He offered Naruto a hand and Naruto took it, and the exchange said thanks in a dialect neither of them needed to translate. They climbed. The volunteers on the longboats pretended to adjust ropes they'd already adjusted twice. Someone cheered and then covered his mouth, embarrassed, and Myra's voice on the analog radio said, let them have it. And nobody pretended to be professional for 5 seconds. On the highest rock, Percy looked back. The world didn't vanish. It spun gentler, a drain that had decided to be a conversation. The seal wasn't a lock. It was a pattern anyone stubborn enough could sit with and continue. He liked that. He'd never liked locks. His phone buzzed with a number he had stopped saving. Because the app kept asking if he wanted to add it to favorites and he didn't like what that implied. Your refusal is inefficient, the message read. You will learn or break. He typed. I'm not a jar. No reply came. Maybe Isari was busy rewriting his appetite around a dimmer city. Maybe he was counting cameras that had gone to sleep on purpose. Naruto leaned on the rail and watched waves try to remember which way was out. You could have kept it, he said, casual. The surge. Yeah, Percy said. You didn't, Naruto said. I like sleeping, Percy said. I like not being scared of my own hands. Naruto smiled. Small. Good. Keep liking that. They found the fisherwoman's thermos. The tea tasted like rust and victory and something bitter that made the tongue honest. Percy drank until his hands stopped shaking. Mira arrived 20 minutes later in a boat that looked held together by personality and wire. She hauled herself up the ladder, hair stuck to her forehead, jacket salt-stitched. She didn't ask for permission. She hugged Percy without warning and long enough to count. Dumb, she said into his shoulder. Effective, he said into her hair. She stepped back and flicked his chest with 2 fingers over the mark, as if scolding a pet rock. You scared me the exact amount I said you weren't allowed to. Don't do it again. I'll do it better next time, he said. Compromise, she said, resigned. She looked at Naruto. Hi, I'm Mira. I've been investigating your son in several jurisdictions. Naruto grinned. Neat. I've been teaching him to annoy your bosses. Mutual aid, she said, deadpan. She turned toward the city. Okay. Celebration window is closed. He's going to look for a faster pipe. Fiber, Percy said, mouth twisting. Our crowds, our faith, or all 3, Mira said. We can't fight the whole grid, but we can make it play nicer. I've got an idea that will get me fired and maybe keep kids' hospitals open when he throws a tantrum. Do it, Naruto said. Kai came skidding along the rocks 5 minutes after she said the word fired, breath just a little high, hair damp, smile hidden and obvious. He stopped in front of Percy and held out a sandwich in butcher paper. You ran down a cliff to hand me lunch, Percy said. 2 sandwiches, Kai said. I also owe you an apology. For what? For calling you a hazard before I'd seen you choose, Kai said, straight. You're still a hazard, just not to the people I thought. Percy took the sandwich. I'll aim the hazard, he said. He meant it. Naruto yawned, unrepentant. I'm going to sleep in a place none of you can find, he said, like a man announcing a nap as a strategy. You too. He flicked a finger between Percy and Mira. Share brains without borrowing too much. You, at Kai, stop making lightning jealous. Jealous, Kai said, offended. Yeah, Naruto said. It has feelings. Naruto vanished the way he always did. No smoke, no show, just a man being in one place and then making a better decision. Percy felt the bell stop in his chest lighten when his father's gravity left, which meant they'd bought themselves time. Not safety, time. Mira leaned on the railing. I have a jar, she said. No, Percy said. For Isari, she said. Not you. Don't make that face. It's not a jar. It's a containment architecture that looks like a jar because symbolism makes my engineers feel cute. But if we take a whisper off him when he tries to ride our lines next time, I need a place to put it that won't poison the plumbing. Under the lighthouse, Kai said. Basement's dry when it shouldn't be. Old foundation. Cursed. Probably. Perfect. Perfect. She agreed, grim. Let's go bother a lighthouse keeper who hates metaphors. Percy finished the sandwich in 4 bites because he didn't know if he'd get to again. He tucked the wrapping into his pocket so the wind wouldn't tell on their appetite. He looked once more at the whirl and the way it turned like a conversation you could leave and come back to without losing your place. He didn't say anything romantic to it. He didn't promise it a future. He nodded at it like a colleague at the end of a shift. As they climbed down to the boats, the mark hummed once, mild, like a well-fed animal deciding not to knock a vase off a table. He tapped his chest with 2 fingers and told it, quietly, you're just a story I get to tell better. Not the narrator. The night tried on a hint of dawn at the edges. The city waited, dimmer, quieter, no less itself. They had a jar to borrow, a keeper to annoy, lines to reroute, and a god to put on a diet. Percy rolled his shoulders, winced at a bruise he didn't remember earning, and helped shove off. Chapter 7 End.